Jesus Christ.
The hands hit her back with the force of a battering ram. Lieutenant Commander Elena Hawthorne, 52 years old, and one of the first women to ever earn a Navy SEAL Trident, felt herself launched forward into empty air. No rope, no harness. Just 300 feet of sheer cliff face dropping into darkness below. Above her, Jackson Frost's voice carried on the wind, cold and satisfied.
Contact.
Problem solved. They weren't throwing down ropes. They weren't shouting for help. They were walking away, boots crunching on gravel, leaving her to die in the Sierra Nevada mountains. But they'd made one fatal mistake. They'd pushed a SEAL. Before we begin, if you appreciate stories of resilience, courage, and justice, please subscribe to our channel. Stay with us until the very end to see how this incredible journey unfolds, and comment below with your city so we can see how far this story reaches around the world. Elena's fingers clawed at empty air, her body rotating as gravity claimed her. The mountain face blurred past jagged granite, scattered pine branches, patches of ice still clinging to shadowed crevices even in late May. Her brain, trained through 15 years and thousands of hours of combat situations, didn't panic. It calculated. 3 seconds of freefall. Velocity increasing. Terminal impact in approximately 4.2 seconds, unless she found purchase. Her right hand slammed into an outcropping. Flesh tore. Bone cracked. She felt her wrist give way, ligaments screaming. But her fingers locked into a crevice barely wider than a credit card, and her body jerked to a halt so violent, her shoulder separated with a wet pop, that she felt more than heard. She hung there, suspended blood already streaming down her forearm and dripping into the void below. Above, Frost's voice drifted down. "Well, damn, that was cleaner than I thought it'd be." "Think she's dead?" Another voice, Cooper, the communications specialist. "We'll be in about 30 seconds. Ain't nobody hanging on one-handed with that kind of impact. Should we check? What for 300 feet onto rock she's done?" Boots shuffled, then silence. Elena closed her eyes, forcing her breathing to steady despite the white-hot agony radiating from her shoulder, her wrist, her ribs. Something had broken when she'd caught herself. Maybe 2 ribs, maybe 3. Each breath felt like knives stabbing into her chest cavity. But she was alive, and they'd just walked away. The arrogance of it filled her with something beyond anger, a cold, crystalline fury that pushed past the pain, past the exhaustion, past the rational voice in her head screaming that she couldn't possibly climb back up. She opened her eyes and looked down. 285 feet of vertical cliff face stretched below her position, disappearing into shadow and pine trees. The outcropping she clung to was already crumbling, small pieces of stone breaking away under her grip, pinging down the mountain face. She had maybe 2 minutes before it gave way completely. Elena pulled in a breath that tasted of copper and stone dust. Her left arm dangled useless, the shoulder clearly dislocated. Her right wrist was either badly sprained or fractured. Blood from a gash on her temple dripped into her left eye. Any rational person would let go, would accept the inevitable. But SEALs weren't trained to be rational. They were trained to be relentless. "Wrong SEAL to kill Jackson," she whispered to the mountain. She began to climb. 3 days earlier, the mission had seemed routine. Elena had arrived at Forward Operating Base Sierra 7 just after dawn, the sun barely cresting the mountain peaks when the helicopter touched down on the makeshift landing pad. The air at 8,000 feet carried the sharp bite of altitude and pine clean in a way that city air never managed. She'd stepped off the helicopter with her gear bag slung over one shoulder, surveying the base camp with the automatic threat assessment every operator developed after enough deployments. 4 prefab structures arranged in a defensive square. Communication tower on the eastern edge. Equipment storage to the west. The terrain beyond, that's what made this place valuable for training. Some of the most unforgiving mountain environment in North America. "Lieutenant Commander Morgan," a voice called from near the command structure. She turned to see a man approaching late 40s, maybe 6'2", built like he'd spent serious time in the gym, but with the weathered face of someone who'd seen real action. A scar ran from his right temple down to the corner of his mouth, pulling his expression into a permanent half-sneer. "It's Hawthorne now, actually," she corrected. "Remarried and took back my maiden name after the divorce." "Right," he extended a hand. "Jackson Frost, Blackhawk Defense. I'll be running the contractor side of this exercise." His handshake was firm, testing she recognized, seeing if she'd try to match his strength or if she'd defer. She met it exactly professional, neither yielding nor competing. "Heard you broke the sniper course record at Dam Neck." Frost continued, his pale blue eyes assessing her. "Color me impressed." "Just doing my job, Mr. Frost." "It's just Frost." He gestured toward 3 men standing near the equipment shed. "My team: Elliot Cooper Communications, Ryan Miller Weapons Specialist, Thomas Reed Logistics and Heavy Equipment." Elena nodded to each in turn. Cooper was lean, nervous energy in every movement, constantly checking a tablet in his hands. Miller looked young, maybe 30, with the eager, hungry expression of someone still trying to prove something. Reed was built like a tank, quiet eyes that tracked everything. All of them studied her with that particular look she'd learned to recognize over 15 years, the mixture of skepticism and curiosity that greeted female operators. Wondering if she was the real deal or a political appointment. Wondering if they'd have to carry her weight. She was used to it. Hell, she'd earned her way past it more times than she could count. "Mission parameters are straightforward," Frost said, pulling out a tactical map. 5-day extreme environment training exercise. We're testing new protocols for high-altitude reconnaissance and extraction. Your CO said you've got mountain warfare experience from Afghanistan. 2 deployments, Hindu Kush region. Good. Then you know the challenges. Altitude weather changes terrain that'll kill you if you're not paying attention. He traced a route on the map. We'll be covering approximately 40 clicks over rough country, summiting 3 peaks and running live-fire exercises in the canyons. Elena studied the map, her trained eye picking out details. The route made sense, good training value, manageable risk level. But something in Frost's tone felt off. Not hostile exactly, but guarded, like he was reading from a script. "Where's the rest of your team?" she asked. "I was briefed there'd be a larger contractor presence." "Schedule conflicts. We're running lean this cycle." That was odd. Contractors usually jumped at these joint exercises. Good pay, good training looked excellent on their resumes for future contracts. Running a 5-day mountain exercise with just 4 people seemed understaffed. "Equipment check in 30 minutes, Frost continued. "We head out at 0800. Any questions?" "Just one. What's Blackhawk Defense's stake in this particular exercise? These protocols being developed for a specific contract?" Frost's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Above my pay grade, Commander. We go where we're told, same as you." He walked away before she could respond. Elena spent the next 20 minutes stowing her gear in her assigned quarters, a prefab room barely large enough for a cot and footlocker. As she unpacked, her fingers brushed against something unexpected in the inside pocket of her climbing harness. A carabiner, Swedish design, older model. Her heart rate kicked up a notch. She recognized this type. Colonel William Hayes, her former commander and mentor, had shown her similar gear during her early SEAL training. Old school technology from his era of operations. She turned it over in her hands, examining it closely. To anyone else, it looked like standard climbing equipment. But Elena knew better. The slight weight distribution was wrong. The locking mechanism too complex for a simple carabiner. It was a SATCOM tracker, ancient by modern standards, running on frequencies nobody monitored anymore, which meant nobody could scan for it either. Hayes. It had to be. She hadn't told anyone about this mission except her immediate command chain. The fact that Hayes had somehow gotten this into her gear meant he'd been monitoring her assignments, meant he was worried. Elena clipped the device to her harness, making sure it looked natural among her other equipment, then pulled out her encrypted phone. She had maybe 10 minutes before the equipment check. The call connected after 3 rings. "Morgan?" Hayes's graveled voice came through with that familiar mix of gruffness and concern that had defined their relationship since her earliest days at Bud's training. "Thought you'd be halfway up a mountain by now." It's Hawthorne again, sir, and I haven't left base camp yet. She kept her voice low. The tracker. I'm assuming you have a good reason for it. Silence. Then, listen to me carefully, Elena. I've been hearing things about Blackhawk Defense. Nothing concrete, nothing I could take up the chain, but enough to make me uncomfortable. What kind of things? The kind that involve contractors doing work for people who shouldn't have private military forces at their disposal. The kind where operators go out on routine missions and come back different if they come back at all. He paused. Word is they've got friends in high places and enemies in places that should matter more. Elena felt her stomach tighten. You think this isn't standard cross-training? I think you need to watch your six. If anything feels wrong, truly wrong, you abort. That's an order. You know that's not how I operate, sir. A sigh crackled through the connection. No, it isn't. Which is exactly why I slipped you that tracker. If you activate the emergency beacon, triple-click the lock mechanism, I'll have a team moving inside 20 minutes. Is that even legal? Legal enough to keep you alive if things go sideways. His voice softened slightly. Elena, I've buried too many good operators. Don't make me add you to that list. I'll be careful, sir. Careful keeps you breathing. Smart keeps you ahead of threats. Be both. The call disconnected. Elena sat on her cot for a long moment, turning the carabiner over in her hands. Hayes didn't spook easily. The man had run operations from the Gulf War through the War on Terror. If he was worried enough to violate protocol and slip her covert equipment, something was genuinely wrong. She clipped the tracker to her harness and headed out for equipment check. The first day passed without incident. They'd hiked 8 clicks through increasingly rough terrain, Frost setting a punishing pace that would have broken most people. But Elena kept up easily, her conditioning still excellent despite being 52 years old. Age might have stolen some of her speed, but it had given her endurance and judgment that her younger self had lacked. That evening, as they made camp in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, she noticed small things. Glances exchanged between Frost's team when they thought she wasn't looking. Cooper stepping away to make satellite phone calls, his voice too low to hear. Extra equipment crates that hadn't been on the manifest, loaded under tarps that nobody discussed. She said nothing, just observed and remembered. After dinner, MREs eaten in relative silence, Elena volunteered for first watch. Frost had looked surprised, but agreed. As the others settled into their sleeping bags, she positioned herself on the perimeter, ostensibly watching for wildlife, actually watching the camp. At 2300 hours, Cooper emerged from his tent and walked 20 meters into the tree line. Elena gave him 30 seconds, then ghosted through the forest behind him, silent as smoke. She found him crouched behind a Boulder satellite phone pressed to his ear. Confirmed. Target is in position. We'll reach the designated coordinates by 1400 tomorrow. Pause. Understood. Extraction will be clean. No evidence. No witnesses. Another pause. What about the SEAL? She's not stupid, sir. She's already asking questions. Elena's blood went cold. Copy that, Cooper continued. Frost says the cliff section will work. 300-foot drop, no recovery possible. We'll make it look like equipment failure. Longer pause. Yes, sir. By this time tomorrow, problem solved. Elena pulled back silently, her heart hammering against her ribs. They were planning to kill her. Tomorrow at some cliff section, make it look like an accident. She slipped back to her watch position, mind racing through tactical options. She could abort, now claim equipment failure or injury, and call for extraction. Hayes would pull her out, no questions asked. But if she left, whatever Blackhawk Defense was really doing up here would continue. Other operators might be sent into the same trap. And the casual way Cooper had said, no witnesses, suggested this wasn't their first time removing inconvenient observers. Elena touched the tracker on her harness. Emergency beacon, triple click, and Hayes would send a team. But they were 20 clicks from the nearest road in terrain where helicopters couldn't safely fly at night. Response time would be minimum 90 minutes, probably longer. She'd have to survive on her own first. The second day's hike took them higher into the mountains. The altitude pressed against Elena's lungs, but she'd trained for this controlled breathing, efficient movement, conserving energy. Around midday, they reached a section of trail that hugged the side of a sheer cliff face. This was it, the place they'd chosen. The path was barely 3 feet wide, with the mountain face rising on the left and a straight drop of 300 feet on the right. Technical climbing wasn't required, but one misstep, one accidental shove, and gravity would do the rest. Elena let Miller and Reed take the lead. Cooper followed. Frost positioned himself directly behind her, exactly where someone would be if they intended to push. She could feel his presence like a target painted on her back. They were 50 feet along the exposed section when Frost spoke. "Hell of a view from up here." "Yes, it is," Elena replied, not turning around. "You know, Commander, I've been thinking about what makes a good operator. Physical fitness, sure. Technical skills, absolutely. But the most important thing," his voice dropped lower, "knowing when you're out of your depth." Elena stopped walking. Ahead of her, Miller and Reed had also halted, turning to watch. "Is that a threat, Frost?" "Just an observation. This is dangerous country. Accidents happen. People disappear in mountains like these all the time." "They do," Elena agreed. She turned slowly to face him, her back now to the drop. "But usually because they're careless, or because someone wants them to disappear." Frost's expression hardened. "Careful, Commander. That kind of paranoia isn't healthy. Neither is conspiracy to commit murder." The words hung in the thin mountain air like a physical presence. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Frost's hand shot out, aiming for her chest, intending to send her backward over the edge. But Elena had been ready. She'd been ready since Cooper's phone call last night. She sidestepped left, grabbed Frost's extended arm, and used his own momentum to send him stumbling forward toward the drop. He caught himself at the last second, arms windmilling, then rounded on her with murder in his eyes. "Cooper, Reed. Now." They came at her from both sides. Practiced, coordinated the movements of men who'd done this before. Elena's hand flew to her sidearm, but Miller was faster, his weapon already drawn and aimed at her chest. "Don't," he said quietly. "Makes it messier, but we'll do it that way if we have to." Elena's mind raced through options. 4 against 1, exposed position, limited cover, no backup. Behind Frost, something glinted in the sunlight, a rifle scope positioned on the ridge above them. Sniper overwatch. They'd planned this down to the last detail. "Why?" she asked, buying time, her hand still hovering near her weapon. "What's worth killing the federal operator?" Frost straightened, composing himself. "You're asking the wrong questions, Commander. It's not about what we're doing. It's about what you shouldn't have seen. The equipment crates, the phone calls. You're running something off books. Smart woman. Shame you couldn't just keep your mouth shut and follow orders." He nodded to Cooper. "Do it." Cooper and Reed moved in from both sides. Elena's hand closed on her sidearm grip. The hands hit her back with the force of a battering ram. The world tilted. Sky became ground, became sky. The edge of the cliff disappeared beneath her boots, and suddenly she was in free fall, the mountain face rushing past, the wind screaming in her ears. Her fingers found the outcropping. Her body jerked to a halt, and 300 feet below, the forest waited to claim her. Elena hung one-handed from the crumbling ledge, blood streaming down her arm. Above, she heard Frost's satisfied voice. "Problem solved." Their boots retreated. Within seconds, the cliff path above her was silent. She hung there, muscles screaming, bones grinding against each other in her separated shoulder. The outcropping under her grip creaked ominously, small pieces of stone breaking away, pattering down the cliff face like rain. This was it. The moment every operator trained for, but hoped never to face, the moment when all equipment failed, all backup vanished, all plans crumbled to nothing. The moment when survival came down to pure will versus physical impossibility. Elena's vision grayed at the edges. Blood loss or shock or both. Her right hand was going numb, the fingers locked around stone but losing sensation fast. In maybe 30 seconds, her grip would fail involuntarily. She'd plummet to the forest floor below, and Blackhawk Defense would file a report about a tragic training accident, equipment, failure, body recovered, but too damaged for questions. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, words spoken 30 years ago, when she was 22, and convinced she could take on the world. The mountain doesn't care who you are, Elena. It doesn't care about your dreams or your determination. It only cares if you're strong enough to climb it. She'd proven her strength 1,000 times since then. Bud's training, where she'd been one of 3 women in a class of 56, and the only one to graduate. Hell Week, where she'd learned that the human body could continue functioning long after the mind insisted it was finished. 2 combat deployments where she'd earned her SEAL Trident not through paperwork or politics, but through blood and competence. And 15 years of facing men like Frost, men who looked at her and saw someone less, someone weaker, someone who didn't belong. "Wrong SEAL," she whispered again and began to move. Her left arm was useless, the separated shoulder sending white-hot agony through her entire torso every time she so much as twitched. That left her right arm, the one with the injured wrist, the one already losing feeling. She reached up with her right-hand fingers, searching the cliff face above her current position. Nothing. Smooth granite, no purchase points. She reached again, extending further, ribs grinding together as her torso stretched. There, a crack barely a finger width, maybe 3 inches long. She jammed her index and middle finger into the crack, tested the hold. It felt solid enough. Maybe. Elena took 3 controlled breaths, forcing oxygen into her system, forcing her mind to focus past the pain. Then she released her left hand from the crumbling outcropping and swung it up. Agony exploded through her shoulder as the separated joint took her full body weight. She screamed, couldn't help it, the sound echoing off the cliff face and disappearing into the forest below. But her fingers found a second hold, a tiny ledge barely enough to get fingertips onto. She hung there, suspended by fingertips and sheer will, her body weight pulling at joints and ligaments and broken bones. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with blood and sweat. Then she pulled. Inch by agonizing inch, she dragged herself upward. Her right foot found a micro-ledge, relieving maybe 10 pounds of pressure from her arms. Then her left foot. She hung there, plastered against the cliff face like a spider, breathing hard, vision tunneling. 5 feet of elevation gained, 295 to go. "One move at a time," she whispered to herself. "Just one more move." See. Her right hand reached up again, searching. Found a knob of stone, no bigger than a quarter. Would it hold? Only one way to find out. She transferred her weight. The knob held. Another 6 inches of elevation. Time stopped having meaning. There was only stone and blood and pain, and the endless litany of one more move, just one more move. She passed a small cave entrance, maybe 15 feet of depth, just enough to crawl into and collapse. The temptation was overwhelming. Stop. Rest. Let her body shut down in shelter instead of falling to her death. But stopping meant dying. Even if she survived the night in the cave, her injuries would worsen. Hypothermia would set in as temperatures dropped. Without treatment, her shoulder would become infected, and Frost's team would be back at dawn to confirm the kill. Keep climbing. Her fingers found holds invisible to untrained eyes. Tiny cracks formed by ancient freezing and thawing cycles. Mineral deposits that provided just enough friction. Micro-ledges created by geological processes over millions of years, now offering purchase measured in millimeters. SEAL training had taught her how to see these holds, how to trust them, how to move on terrain that civilians would consider unclimbable. But that training assumed functioning arms, uninjured joints, a body not leaking blood with every movement. She climbed anyway. Somewhere around 90 feet of elevation, still 210 feet to go, her right hand slipped. Her body swung outward suddenly, suspended by only her left hand's tenuous grip. The separated shoulder joint screamed. She felt something tear warm blood running down inside her shirt. Her right hand scrabbled against smooth stone, finding nothing. Nothing. There. A crack, her fingers sliding in, taking hold. She pulled herself back against the cliff face, sobbing with pain and relief. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Her vision kept graying out, coming back, graying out again. But she was still alive, still climbing. At 120 feet of elevation, she heard voices above, distant but distinct in the thin mountain air. Confirming target elimination. No further action required. Cooper, on his satellite phone again. Roger that. Teams Alpha and Bravo proceed to primary objective. Timeline is still on schedule. Elena froze against the cliff face, her muscles locked in position. If they looked over the edge, if they happened to glance down. But they didn't. Why would they? She was dead after all. Dead and broken on the rocks below. No reason to check. The voices faded. Boots crunching on gravel as they walked away from the cliff edge, moving deeper into the mountains, toward whatever primary objective they were discussing. Elena waited 5 full minutes, breathing silently, before she started climbing again. But now her mind was working on 2 tracks, survival and intelligence gathering. They'd called it primary objective. This assassination wasn't the mission, it was clearing obstacles from the mission, which meant whatever Blackhawk Defense was really doing up here was significant enough to murder a federal operator to protect. She needed to survive, but she also needed to find out what the hell was going on. At 160 feet of elevation, she found another cave opening, larger this time, deep enough to provide real shelter. Her body was screaming at her to stop, to rest, to let unconsciousness claim her. But she could hear her father's voice again. The mountain doesn't care about your pain. Keep climbing or die. Those are the only choices. She kept climbing. Her fingers were stripped raw, bleeding freely. Her right wrist had swollen to twice its normal size, every grip sending lightning bolts of pain up her arm. Her ribs grated with every breath, making her wonder if one had punctured a lung. The gash on her temple had stopped bleeding, but vision in her left eye was blurred, possibly from swelling, possibly from concussion. None of it mattered. Only the next handhold mattered. Only the next move. At 200 feet of elevation, 100 feet still to go, she heard something that made her freeze a helicopter. The distant thrum of rotors carried on the wind, coming closer. Elena pressed herself flat against the cliff face, trying to become invisible, trying to become part of the stone itself. If Frost's team had helicopter support, if they'd decided to do aerial confirmation of the kill, but the helicopter passed without slowing, heading east toward the interior of the mountain range. Not searching, just traveling. She started climbing again. At 250 feet, with just 50 feet remaining, her right hand locked into a crack and wouldn't release. The muscles had seized fingers, frozen in position from exhaustion and injury. She couldn't feel them anymore. Couldn't tell if they were gripping or slipping. Elena hung there, her left arm useless, her right hand frozen 50 feet from the ridgeline and survival. So close. Close enough to see the scraggly pine trees at the cliff's edge, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Evening was coming. Soon it would be full dark, and she was stuck. She tried to force her right hand to release. Nothing. The fingers might as well have been welded to the stone. Panic. Real panic started to claw at the edges of her mind. She'd climbed nearly 300 feet with broken bones and torn ligaments and blood loss, and now she was going to die anyway because her own body had betrayed her. No, she said aloud. No, goddammit, no! She pulled her legs up, feet finding holds, taking weight off her frozen hand. Then she reached across her body with her useless left arm, grabbed her right wrist, and pulled. The pain was indescribable. Her separated shoulder joint ground together. The broken bones in her wrist shifted. She screamed a raw animal sound that echoed off the cliff face and bounced back at her. But her hand came free from the crack, and she kept climbing. The last 50 feet took everything she had left. Every reserve, every scrap of will, every prayer she'd ever learned. Her movements became automatic, mindless reach grip, pull, step, reach again. Her consciousness had narrowed to a point focused entirely on the next handhold and nothing beyond. When her hand reached up and found level ground instead of cliff face, she almost didn't register it. She pulled herself over the edge of the ridgeline and collapsed onto solid earth, sobbing with pain and exhaustion and relief. She'd made it. Against all odds, against every rational assessment, against physics and probability and her own body's limitations, she'd climbed 300 feet of sheer cliff face with catastrophic injuries. She lay there for maybe 2 minutes, just breathing, just feeling solid ground beneath her. Above her, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Then she heard the voices again, closer this time. Sure, she's dead. Unless she sprouted wings, yeah. 300-foot drop onto rocks. Nobody survives that. We should check. Make sure. Frost said not to waste time. We've got a timeline to meet. Still think we should... You want to tell Frost his orders weren't good enough. Be my guest. Silence. Then, fine. Let's move. Elena lay perfectly still as boots passed within 20 feet of her position. She couldn't see them clearly in the gathering darkness, but she counted 4 distinct footfalls. Frost's whole team. She waited until the sound of their passage faded completely. Then she pushed herself to her knees, biting back a scream as her broken ribs shifted. Standing was impossible, her legs wouldn't support her weight. But she could crawl. She dragged herself away from the cliff edge into the shelter of the pine trees. In the darkness, she found what she was looking for, a deadfall log hollow on one side big enough to crawl under. Elena pulled herself into the shelter, her hand finding the tracker on her harness. Her fingers were so swollen and numb, she could barely feel the mechanism, but she managed to locate the lock. Triple click. Emergency beacon. Hayes would come. She just had to survive long enough for him to arrive. She lay in the darkness under the log, listening to her own ragged breathing, feeling blood pool beneath her. Her body temperature was dropping. Shock setting in. She knew the signs knew she needed medical attention soon, or these injuries would kill her just as surely as the fall would have. But she was alive. She'd survived. And tomorrow she was going to find out exactly what Black Hawk Defense was hiding in these mountains. Her eyes closed. Darkness claimed her. But this time it was the darkness of unconsciousness, not death. And somewhere in the night, a helicopter was flying toward her position carrying an old soldier who'd never abandoned one of his own. Elena woke to the sound of rotors cutting through darkness. Her eyes opened but registered only shadows and shapes. The hollow log above her pine needles pressed against her cheek, stars visible through gaps in the wood. Every nerve ending in her body screamed. Her mouth tasted of copper and dirt. The helicopter was close. Maybe a quarter-mile out, searchlight sweeping the ridgeline in systematic patterns. She tried to move. Her body refused. The cold had seeped so deep into her muscles that they'd locked rigid. Her fingers wouldn't flex. Her legs wouldn't respond to commands from her brain. Hypothermia. Stage 2, maybe stage 3. She had maybe an hour before her core temperature dropped enough to stop her heart. The searchlight passed 30 feet from her position, illuminating the forest in harsh white brilliance before moving on. She heard voices over the helicopter's radio system, garbled but distinct. No heat signature in the target zone. Expand search radius. Then a different voice cut through, authoritative and familiar. This is Colonel Hayes. Tighten your search pattern. She's here somewhere and she's alive. Relief flooded through Elena so intensely it was almost painful. Hayes had come, just like he'd promised. She tried to call out, but her throat produced only a strangled rasp. Her vocal cords wouldn't work properly, another symptom of hypothermia. The helicopter made another pass closer this time. The searchlight swept across her hiding spot, and for a moment she was bathed in white light. Did they see her? Could they distinguish her shape from the deadfall and forest debris? The light moved on. Negative contact, a voice said over the radio. Moving to grid 7. No, she was right here. Right here. Elena forced her right hand to move every muscle fiber, screaming in protest. Her fingers found a rock, maybe the size of a baseball. She gripped it, pulled her arm back, and threw with everything she had left. The rock traveled maybe 6 feet before dropping into the underbrush with a pathetic rustle. But it was enough. The searchlight snapped back, pinning her position. The helicopter banked hard rotors, changing pitch as it descended toward a clearing 50 yards away. Contact, I've got her. Elena let her head drop back against the cold ground. She'd done it. She'd survived long enough. The next minutes were chaos, hands lifting her voices, shouting medical terminology, the jarring sensation of being moved too fast. Someone was cutting away her jacket, exposing her injuries to the frigid air. Another voice counted her pulse, calling out numbers that meant nothing to her fogged brain. Then Hayes's face appeared above her, weathered and concerned and absolutely furious. "You stubborn, brilliant, insane woman," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You climbed 300 feet with these injuries. Had to." Elena managed her words slurred. "They pushed me." "I know. We monitored everything through the tracker." His jaw tightened. "Frost and his team think you're dead. Let's keep it that way while we figure out what the hell they're really doing up here." A medic appeared with a thermal blanket and IV kit. "Colonel, she needs a hospital. The shoulder separation alone. Can you stabilize her here? For maybe 6 hours. After that, she needs surgery or she'll lose function in that arm permanently." 6 hours. Hayes looked back at Elena. "That enough time for you to tell me what you saw?" "More than enough," Elena whispered. "But first, I need you to do something. Name it. Don't extract me. Not yet." Hayes stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Elena, you're barely conscious. Your body temperature is 89 degrees. You have at least 3 broken ribs, a separated shoulder, and what looks like a severe wrist fracture. You're asking me to leave you in the field. I'm asking you to help me finish this." She gripped his sleeve with her functioning hand. "They called it primary objective. Killing me was just clearing obstacles. Whatever they're really doing, it's big enough to murder a federal operator. We can't let them complete it." The medic finished inserting the IV warm saline flowing into her veins. The thermal blanket was wrapped around her body, and Elena felt the first edges of warmth beginning to combat the hypothermia. Her thinking cleared slightly. Hayes studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to the medic. "How much can you do for her in 6 hours?" "I can stabilize the obvious trauma, reduce the shoulder dislocation, splint the wrist, wrap the ribs. Pain management and antibiotics to prevent infection. But Colonel, will she be mobile? If by mobile you mean able to walk without collapsing, maybe. If you mean combat ready, absolutely not." "I'll take walking." Hayes looked back at Elena. "You've got 6 hours to recover while we recon Frost's position and figure out what he's doing. After that, if you can stand, you can help. If you can't, you're going to a hospital whether you like it or not. Clear. Clear. Good. Now tell me everything." While the medic worked on her injuries, each procedure a fresh agony that the morphine only partially dulled. Elena recounted everything she'd observed. The suspicious equipment crates, Cooper's phone calls, the conversation she'd overheard about no witnesses and clean extraction, the coordinated attempt to kill her at the cliff. "They mentioned teams Alpha and Bravo proceeding to primary objective," she finished. "Timeline still on schedule. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon." Hayes pulled out a tactical tablet, bringing up satellite imagery of the mountain range. "We've been monitoring radio traffic since your beacon activated. Picked up encrypted communications coming from a location about 8 clicks northeast of your position. Old research facility from the Cold War era, supposedly abandoned." Supposedly? Thermal imaging shows power usage consistent with active operations. Whatever they're doing it there. He zoomed in on the facility, a cluster of buildings nestled in a narrow valley surrounded by steep terrain. "Problem is, we don't have legal authority to breach a private facility without concrete evidence of federal crimes." "They tried to kill a Navy SEAL. That's not concrete enough. It's your word against theirs. They'll claim you fell accidentally, that they searched but couldn't find you in the dark." Hayes's expression hardened. "We need proof of what they're really doing. Something that'll hold up when this goes to court." Elena felt the medic manipulating her shoulder, a sensation like bones grinding against each other, then a sickening pop as the joint relocated. She bit back a scream. "There," the medic said. "Shoulders back in socket. Going to hurt like hell for weeks, but you'll regain function. Now let me look at that wrist." While he worked, Elena's mind was racing through tactical scenarios. 8 clicks of mountain terrain in her condition would take hours, maybe longer. By the time they reached the facility, Frost's operation might be complete. "How many operators do you have with you?" she asked Hayes. 4, plus the flight crew. All retired SEALs I trust with my life. He paused. Not enough to assault a fortified position if Frost has the numbers I suspect he does. Then we don't assault. We infiltrate. Elena winced as the medic splinted her wrist. I go in alone, gather evidence, and get out. You provide overwatch and extraction if it goes wrong. You can barely stand. I'll manage. Elena, sir, with respect, we both know I'm the only option. Your team doesn't have current clearance for covert operations on U.S. soil. If they're caught breaching that facility, it's a federal crime. But I'm active duty operating under direct threat response protocols. If I can document that Frost's operation poses an imminent threat to national security, everything I do is legally defensible. Hayes was silent for several seconds. Then, I hate when you're right. Gets easier with practice, sir. The medic finished wrapping her ribs tight enough to provide support, not so tight she couldn't breathe. That's all I can do here. The morphine will keep the pain manageable for maybe 4 hours. After that, you're going to wish you were dead. Wouldn't be the first time today. Elena tested her mobility carefully, sitting up. The world tilted alarmingly but steadied. She could move. That would have to be enough. Hayes handed her a tactical vest, modified to accommodate her injuries. Body armor, communications gear, and a sidearm. The M4 stays here. You're in no condition to handle a rifle accurately. Understood. My team will position on the ridgeline overlooking the facility. You'll have constant overwatch. First sign you're compromised, we extract you immediately. No heroics, no last stands. Clear. Clear. He helped her to her feet. She swayed but stayed upright. Her left arm was in a sling, her right wrist splinted but functional enough to hold a pistol. Every breath sent sharp pains through her broken ribs. She'd been in worse shape. Barely, but she had been. One more thing, Hayes said, his voice dropping. I pulled some strings, called in favors from people who still owe me. Found out who's bankrolling Blackhawk Defense's operations. Who? Brigadier General Victor Richards. Works out of the Pentagon Classified Operations Oversight. On paper, he's coordinating private contractor integration with military special operations. In practice, Hayes's expression darkened. 3 months ago, a whistleblower tried to expose Richards for authorizing illegal weapons testing. The whistleblower died in a car accident before the investigation could proceed. Elena felt cold. That had nothing to do with hypothermia. Richards is using Blackhawk Defense to run black operations that even the military won't sanction. That's my read, which means whatever they're testing in that facility is something the Pentagon officially can't touch. Hayes met her eyes. This goes deeper than contractor corruption, Elena. This is treason at the highest levels. Then we'd better get proof before they finish whatever they're doing and disappear. The flight to the ridgeline took 12 minutes. Elena spent them checking her gear and forcing her body to respond to commands. The morphine helped, but it also created a dangerous disconnect. She could move without feeling the full extent of her injuries, which meant she could push too far without realizing it until something catastrophic failed. She'd have to be careful. Had to monitor her own limitations. The helicopter dropped them on the ridgeline just as dawn began breaking over the mountains. Pink and gold lights spilled across the peaks, beautiful and utterly indifferent to the violence about to unfold. Through binoculars, Elena studied the facility below. 6 main buildings arranged around a central courtyard surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with razor wire. Guard towers on the corners manned. She counted 8 visible security personnel, all armed with automatic weapons. Heavy security for an abandoned research station, Hayes observed beside her. And look at the vehicles. Elena pointed to a motor pool near the southern gate. 2 Humvees, 3 civilian SUVs, and a cargo truck. Fresh tire tracks leading in but not out. Whatever they brought in, it's still here. One of Hayes's team members, a grizzled operator named Carson with a sniper's build, lowered his spotting scope. I've got movement in Building 3. Looks like technicians, maybe 6 or 7. They're working on something large, metal, lots of cables. Can you see what it is? Negative. Too much interference from the building structure. Elena studied the facility's layout, looking for weak points. The main gate was heavily guarded. The perimeter fence would be difficult to breach without being spotted, but there on the eastern side, where the facility backed up against a steep hillside, the fence line came within 10 feet of heavy forest cover. "There's my entry point," she said, indicating the location. "I can approach through the tree line, go over the fence where the guard towers have limited sight lines, and reach Building 3 from the rear." "What about interior security?" Hayes asked. "Hayes, I'll improvise." "That's not a plan, that's a prayer." "Sometimes prayers are all we've got, sir." Hayes looked like he wanted to argue, but he just sighed. "Carson, you've got Overwatch. Keep your scope on her every second. She goes dark for more than 2 minutes, we breach and extract." "Understood." "Yes, sir." Elena checked her sidearm, a Sig Sauer P226 familiar weight in her good hand. 15 rounds plus 1 in the chamber. Hopefully she wouldn't need any of them. 1 hour, Hayes said. "In and out. Get photos, get evidence, and get back here. We'll take everything we find straight to JAG and let the lawyers sort out jurisdictions." 1 hour, Elena agreed. She started down the hillside, moving slowly to avoid dislodging rocks or snapping branches. Her injured body protested every step, but the morphine kept the pain at a manageable level. Manageable, not absent. She could feel the broken ribs grinding together, feel the pressure building in her relocated shoulder. 45 minutes to reach the fence line. She used the time to observe patrol patterns timing the guards' movements. They were professional but complacent, going through motions rather than expecting actual threats. Made sense. They were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by mountains operating under the protection of a Pentagon general. They weren't expecting a half-dead seal to come crawling out of the forest. Elena waited until the nearest guard passed, heading away from her position. Then she moved to the fence, using her good hand to grip the chain link while her feet found purchase. Climbing sent white-hot agony through her ribs, but she forced herself upward over the razor wire, careful, so careful, and down the other side. She dropped into a crouch behind a maintenance shed, breathing hard. The morphine was wearing off faster than expected. She could feel it, the pain sharpening, becoming more immediate. Keep moving. Focus on the mission. She ghosted between buildings, using shadows and angles to avoid sight lines from the guard towers. Building 3 was a large warehouse-style structure with heavy power cables running to it from external generators. The rear entrance was secured with a keypad lock. Elena studied it for 10 seconds, then pulled a small toolkit from her vest. Lock-picking wasn't her specialty, but she knew enough. 30 seconds of work, and the mechanism clicked open. She slipped inside. The interior was massive high-ceiling concrete floor banks of computer equipment along the walls. And in the center, the object Carson had spotted through his scope, a weapons system unlike anything Elena had seen in 15 years of military service. It looked like a marriage between a traditional artillery piece and something out of science fiction. 6 rotating barrels arranged in a hexagonal pattern mounted on a platform with 360-degree traverse capability. But it was the control system that made Elena's blood run cold. No manual firing controls, no human operator positions. Just banks of servers, screens displaying complex algorithms, and a single interface terminal with text that made her stomach drop. Project Orpheus Autonomous Target Selection and Elimination System. Status online. Elena pulled out her phone, snapping photos from every angle. The weapons system, the control interfaces, the technical specifications displayed on nearby monitors. Evidence. Proof that Richards was developing fully autonomous weapons that could select and kill targets without human oversight. Well, should have checked more carefully. Elena spun around her sidearm. Coming up, Jackson Frost stood in the doorway, his own weapon trained on her center mass. Behind him, Cooper and Reed spread out flanking positions, all armed. "Commander Hawthorne," Frost continued, his voice almost admiring, "you climbed 300 feet with broken ribs. I'm genuinely impressed, but you should have stayed dead." Elena's mind raced through options. 3 hostiles, all with superior positioning. Her injuries limiting mobility. No cover except the weapons system itself, and using that for concealment would put her back against a literal wall. "So, you're developing autonomous kill systems," she said, buying time, her finger resting on the trigger. "Violating every international treaty on AI warfare. That's what this is about." "This isn't about violation," Frost replied. "It's about evolution. Warfare's changing commander. Human operators have limitations, emotions, hesitation, fatigue. Orpheus doesn't. It identifies threats and eliminates them with perfect efficiency. It identifies threats based on algorithms written by people. Who decides what constitutes a threat? People who understand that war isn't won by those with the most ethics. It's won by those with the most effective tools." Elena's hand tightened on her weapon. "You're a soldier, Frost. You took an oath to defend the Constitution, not to build machines that decide who lives and dies without human judgment." Something flickered in Frost's eyes. Regret, maybe, or the ghost of the man he'd been before Black Hawk Defense. Then it vanished. That oath died when the system betrayed people like me. When politicians sent us to fight wars they didn't have the stomach to win. When they cut budgets and benefits while expecting us to keep bleeding for them. His voice hardened. Orpheus is the future. Richards understands that. He's giving us the tools to actually win wars instead of managing them. By removing human accountability from killing. By removing human weakness. The standoff held for 3 seconds. Then Elena saw Cooper's finger tighten on his trigger, saw the micro-shift in his stance that preceded firing. She dove left behind the weapons platform as gunfire erupted. Bullets sparked off metal and concrete. She rolled, came up, fired twice at Cooper. Both rounds hit center mass and he went down. Reed returned fire, forcing her back behind cover. Her ribs screamed as she moved the relocated shoulder, threatening to separate again. The morphine was definitely gone now, every injury announcing itself with crystalline clarity. "Contain her," Frost's voice. "Richards wants this wrapped up in 30 minutes." More gunfire. Elena blind-fired around the platform's edge, not expecting to hit anything, just creating enough threat to keep them cautious. Her magazine had maybe 11 rounds left, not enough for a sustained firefight. Then her earpiece crackled to life. Hayes' voice, urgent. "Elena, we've got incoming. 3 vehicles just pulled through the main gate, armed personnel deploying. You need to extract now." "Bit busy at the moment, sir." "We're moving to your position. Hold for 90 seconds. 90 seconds. She had to survive 90 seconds. Reed was advancing on her left, using equipment banks for cover. Frost had disappeared, probably circling to flank. The weapons platform provided decent concealment, but zero protection. If they coordinated their attack, they could pin her down and finish her in seconds. Elena's eyes fell on the control terminal for Orpheus. The system was online, powered up, ready. A crazy idea, formed the kind of idea that only made sense when you were out of options and high on adrenaline. She holstered her sidearm and lunged for the terminal, fingers flying across the keyboard. The interface was intuitive military design meant to be operated under stress. She accessed the target selection menu, overrode the safety protocols with an administrator code she'd memorized from the technical specifications on the monitors. "What is she doing?" Reed's voice alarmed. Frost appeared from behind a server bank, saw her at the terminal, and his eyes went wide. "Stop her. She's activating." Elena hit enter. The Orpheus system came alive with a hum that vibrated through the concrete floor. The hexagonal barrel array rotated servos, whining, targeting algorithms, processing data at impossible speeds. The screens flashed red as the AI identified multiple threats in the facility, including Frost and Reed. Jesus Christ, shut it down. Frost was running for a kill switch on the far wall. The first burst from Orpheus caught Reed before he could move 3 rounds, stitching across his chest with mechanical precision. He dropped without a sound. Frost dove behind a support pillar as the weapon system tracked him, barrels rotating to maintain lock. "You've killed us all." Orpheus can't distinguish between friendly and hostile when there's no human operator. Elena finished moving away from the terminal as the system continued its autonomous threat assessment. "That's exactly my point, Jackson. You built a machine that kills without judgment. Now it's doing its job." She ran for the rear exit as Orpheus fired again, punching holes through the support pillar where Frost had taken cover. Behind her, she heard his voice screaming into a radio. "Emergency shutdown Building 3. We have a catastrophic system failure." Elena burst through the rear door into dawn light. Her body was failing. She could feel it in the way her legs trembled in the gray fuzz encroaching on her vision. But she was still moving, still breathing. Gunfire erupted from her left, the reinforcements Hayes had warned about deploying from their vehicles. She zigged right, using buildings for cover, her injured body protesting every direction change. Then Hayes was there, Carson and two other operators providing covering fire as they extracted her from the facility. Strong hands grabbed her vest, pulling her toward the perimeter fence. "Building 3 is compromised," Hayes was shouting into his radio. "Fall back to extraction point." They hit the fence running. Carson cut the chain link with bolt cutters, creating an opening. Elena stumbled through her legs, finally giving out. Hayes caught her before she hit the ground. "I've got you. Just stay conscious." Behind them, inside Building 3, she heard explosions, controlled bursts, as Orpheus continued firing, perhaps hitting critical systems, perhaps hitting personnel. Then a larger explosion and a fireball rose into the morning sky as something catastrophic failed. The facility alarm was screaming. Guards were running in every direction, confused, trying to understand what had happened. Hayes's team used the chaos to disappear into the forest, carrying Elena between them. They reached the helicopter extraction point 4 minutes later. Elena collapsed onto the deck as the rotors spooled up her body, finally done pretending it could function. Hayes leaned over her, checking her vitals. "You just turned their own weapon against them, and documented the whole thing with the photos on your phone." "Did it work?" Elena managed. "Did we get enough?" "You got enough to bring down Richards and everyone connected to this operation." He pressed a fresh IV into her arm, more saline, more antibiotics. "Now you're going to a hospital, and this time I'm not taking no for an answer." Elena wanted to argue, but consciousness was slipping away like water through her fingers. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was the helicopter lifting off, carrying her away from the mountains where she'd died and been reborn. Where she'd proven that sometimes the most dangerous weapon wasn't the one with the most advanced technology. It was the one with the most determination to see justice done. Elena woke to fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic. Her body felt distant, disconnected, like she was piloting it remotely through layers of pharmaceutical fog. A heart monitor beeped steadily beside her bed. Her left arm was immobilized in a complex brace. Her torso was wrapped so tight she could barely draw breath. "Welcome back." She turned her head, a movement that sent fresh pain shooting through her neck, to find Hayes sitting in a chair beside the bed. He looked exhausted, lines carved deep around his eyes that hadn't been there 2 days ago. "How long?" Her voice came out as a rasp. 18 hours. They operated on your shoulder, reset your wrist properly, dealt with the internal bleeding from your ribs. He leaned forward. "The doctors said if you'd pushed yourself another hour, you would have died. Your body was shutting down. But I didn't push another hour. Mission complete, right?" Hayes's expression was unreadable. "That depends on your definition of complete." Elena's stomach dropped. "What happened?" "The good news, your photos and the explosion at the facility gave us enough to launch a full investigation. JAG has opened criminal proceedings against Black Hawk Defense. Their assets are frozen operations, suspended pending review. And the bad news: Frost survived. So did 2 members of his team. They're claiming you went rogue, that you activated Orpheus deliberately to kill Cooper and Reed, that the whole thing was a breakdown by an unstable operator who couldn't handle being pushed out of an active SEAL team." Elena stared at him. "That's insane." "That's their story. And they've got Brigadier General Richards backing them up. He's saying he authorized a legitimate weapons development program, that Black Hawk Defense had all proper clearances, and that you infiltrated a classified facility without authorization and caused millions in damage. He's lying through his teeth. Of course he is, but he's a general with 30 years of service and friends in very high places. You're a lieutenant commander with a history of bucking authority." Hayes's voice softened. "They're painting you as a problem operator who finally snapped. The photos prove that Orpheus exists, don't prove it's illegal. Richards is claiming it was being developed under a classified DARPA contract with full Pentagon oversight. Without access to the actual contract documentation, we can't definitively prove otherwise." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it settling on her chest. She'd survived a 300-foot fall, climbed broken and bleeding, infiltrated an armed facility, and turned their own weapon against them. And it still might not be enough. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now you recover. The investigation continues. And we hope that someone in Frost's organization decides the truth is worth more than their loyalty to Richards." Hayes stood, moving to the window. "I've got people digging into Richards' background looking for financial connections to Blackhawk Defense. Anything that proves he was running this off books. But it's slow going. The man's been covering his tracks for years." "What about Frost? Can we get him to talk?" "He's lawyered up. So is his surviving team. They're not saying a word without immunity deals, and JAG won't offer immunity without more evidence." Hayes turned back to face her. "We're in a stalemate, Elena, and while we sit here in legal limbo, Richards is probably destroying evidence and building his defense." A nurse entered, checking Elena's vitals and adjusting her IV. After she left, Elena said quietly, "There has to be something we're missing, some angle we haven't considered. If there is, I haven't found it." Hayes moved toward the door. "Rest. Let your body heal. I'll keep working the investigation." "Sir," he paused, hand on the doorframe. "Thank you for coming when I activated the beacon, for believing me." Hayes's expression softened. "You're one of the best operators I've ever trained, Elena. I'd go through hell for any of my people. But for you," he shook his head slightly, "you've never asked for special treatment, never used your gender as an excuse or a weapon. You just showed up every day and did the work. That kind of integrity is rare, worth protecting." He left before she could respond. Elena lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, her mind working through the problem like a tactical puzzle. There had to be a weakness in Richards's defense. Had to be something that would break the stalemate. She was still thinking 3 hours later, when her phone buzzed, the burner phone Hayes had left on her bedside table, not her official device. The screen showed an unknown number. She answered. "Hawthorne." "Commander." The voice was male, rough speaking, barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." "Who is this?" "Someone who knows what really happened at that facility. Someone who's tired of watching good people get destroyed while rats like Richards stay protected." A pause. "My name is Thomas Reed." Elena's breath caught. Reed, one of Frost's team, the logistics specialist. The one who'd been in Building 3 when Orpheus activated. "You're supposed to be dead," she said carefully. "I saw you go down. Ballistic vest stopped most of it. Couple cracked ribs, collapsed lung, but I made it, unlike Cooper." His voice was tight with something guilt, maybe, or anger. "I've been thinking a lot while recovering, about what we've become, what I've become." "Why are you calling me?" "Because Frost and Richards are going to let you take the fall for all of this, and that's wrong. You didn't activate Orpheus to kill people. You activated it to prove a point that autonomous weapons can't distinguish between targets and innocents when the programming fails." Reed coughed, the sound wet and painful. "I was Delta Force for 8 years. Fought in places that don't officially exist, did things that still wake me up at night. But I always knew why I was doing it. Who the enemy was. Orpheus doesn't know, can't know, and Richards doesn't care." "What are you offering, Mr. Reed?" "Information. Evidence. Whatever you need to prove Richards has been running illegal operations through Blackhawk Defense for the last 3 years." Another pause. "But I need something in exchange. Immunity. Protection. For me and my family. Richards has people everywhere. The moment he knows I'm talking, my wife and kids become targets." Elena's mind raced. This was the break they needed, an insider willing to testify. But she had no authority to offer protection, and going through official channels would alert Richards' network before they could secure Reed's family. "I can't promise immunity," she said, "but I know someone who can arrange protection. Where are you?" "Safe house in Reno. Can you get here?" "I'm in a hospital bed in San Diego with more broken bones than functional ones." "Then we've got a problem because I'm not staying here longer than 48 hours. After that, I disappear and you lose your chance at the truth." Elena looked at the IV in her arm, the monitors tracking her vital signs, the brace immobilizing her shoulder. Her doctor had said she needed at least a week of bed rest before attempting any physical activity. "I'll be there in 24 hours, she said. "You're insane." "So I've been told. Text this number with the address." She disconnected before Reed could argue, then immediately dialed Hayes. He answered on the second ring. "Elena, what?" Reed called. "He's willing to talk, willing to provide evidence against Richards, but he needs protection for his family, and he's only giving us 48 hours. "Where is he?" "Reno. And before you say it, yes, I know I'm supposed to be in bed. Yes, I know my doctor will lose his mind. And yes, I'm still going." Hayes was silent for several seconds. Then, "I'll have a plane ready in 3 hours. Medical team on board to monitor you during the flight. But Elena, if your body gives out, it won't. It almost did 2 days ago. 2 days ago, I climbed a cliff and infiltrated an armed facility. Flying to Reno and conducting an interview is practically a vacation." She heard Hayes sigh, the sound of a man who'd learned when arguing was futile. 3 hours. And if you collapse, I'm sedating you and dragging you back to that hospital bed personally. Fair enough, sir. Disconnecting her monitors without triggering alarms required more finesse than Elena had anticipated. She managed it by carefully removing each lead during the gaps in the nurse's rounds, then using medical tape to simulate connection points that wouldn't immediately alert the monitoring station. Her IV was trickier. She left it in place but disconnected the line, hiding the tubes under her hospital gown. Getting dressed was agony. Every movement pulled at stitches, stressed damaged tissue, reminded her exactly how close she'd come to permanent disability. But she forced herself through it, muscle memory and seal stubbornness, overriding her body's screaming protests. She was pulling on her boots one-handed, a process that took 5 frustrating minutes when the door opened. A young woman stood there, maybe 30, dressed in civilian clothes but moving with the controlled precision of military training. "Commander Hawthorne, Colonel Hayes sent me to escort you. You're not dressed like a soldier. Because walking you out in uniform would attract attention. I'm Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Naval Intelligence. The colonel thought you might need help getting past hospital security." He thought correctly. Elena stood testing her balance. The room tilted slightly, but steadied. "How are we doing this?" "Wheelchair discharge papers I forged using your doctor's credentials, and a lot of confidence." Chen produced a wheelchair from the hallway. "Sit. Try to look pathetic." "Won't be hard." Chen wheeled her toward the elevators, moving with casual authority. They passed 2 nurses and a security guard without incident. The elevator doors closed and Chen pressed the button for the ground floor. "Colonel Hayes speaks highly of you," Chen said as they descended. "Says you're one of the toughest operators he's trained." "He's biased." "Maybe. But I read your file. Bud's training, 2 combat deployments, instructor ratings in advanced reconnaissance and sniper tactics. And now climbing 300 feet with catastrophic injuries and surviving long enough to expose a treasonous conspiracy." Chen glanced down at her. "That's not bias, Commander. That's facts." The elevator doors opened. Chen wheeled her through the lobby past the reception desk, where a distracted clerk barely glanced at the forged discharge papers. Then they were outside into the cool evening air, where a black SUV waited with Hayes in the driver's seat. "You look terrible," he said as Chen helped Elena into the passenger seat. "You should see the other guys." "I did. Cooper's dead. Reed's talking. And Frost is facing enough charges to put him away for life even without Reed's testimony." Hayes pulled into traffic. "But Richards is still untouchable unless we can prove he ordered illegal operations. Reed said he has evidence going back 3 years. If it's genuine, it'll be enough. If it's not, we've wasted our best chance and tipped Richards off that someone's cooperating." Hayes merged onto the highway heading toward the airport. "Everything depends on whether Reed is legitimately turning or if this is Richards' way of finding out what we know." Elena hadn't considered that possibility. "You think it's a trap? I think Reed called you specifically instead of going through official channels. That's either because he's genuinely afraid of Richards' reach into the system, or because Richards wants to see how you respond to an approach from a cooperating witness. Only one way to find out. By walking into potential ambush while barely able to stand. Fantastic plan. They reached the airport 20 minutes later, a private terminal used for military and government flights. The plane Hayes had arranged was a small medical transport configured with equipment that could handle emergency care if Elena's condition deteriorated mid-flight. The flight to Reno took 90 minutes. Elena spent them reviewing everything she knew about Reed. Former Delta Force logistics specialist, quiet but competent. He'd been present at all the critical moments, the cliff where she'd been pushed, the facility where Orpheus was housed. If he was genuine, his testimony could corroborate everything. If he wasn't, she was about to walk into Richards's crosshairs. They landed at a private airfield outside Reno just after midnight. Another SUV waited, this one driven by Carson the sniper from Hayes's team. Address Reed sent is a residential neighborhood, Carson reported as they drove. Single-family homes, decent sightlines, multiple escape routes. Could be legitimate, could be a kill box. Which is why you're setting up Overwatch before we approach, Hayes said. He handed Elena a fresh sidearm. You're not going in alone. If Reed sees a tactical team, he'll run. Then he'll see 2 visitors instead of 1. Non-negotiable, Elena. She didn't argue. Truth was, she wasn't sure her body could handle a confrontation if this went bad. Hayes's presence might be the difference between completing the mission and dying in a suburban safe house. Carson dropped them 3 blocks from the target address, then disappeared to establish a sniper position. Hayes and Elena approached on foot, moving slowly to accommodate her injuries. Every step sent fresh waves of pain through her ribs. The house was a modest ranch-style lights on in the front room but curtains drawn. No vehicles in the driveway, no obvious surveillance. They reached the front door. Hayes positioned himself to the side weapon ready, but not visible. Elena knocked. 10 seconds of silence. Then the door opened a crack, security chain still attached. Reed's face appeared in the gap, gaunt and pale, one side of his chest, wrapped in bandages. You came. Said I would. Can we come in? Reed's eyes flicked to Hayes. Who's this? Colonel William Hayes, retired SEAL commander. He's coordinating the investigation into Richards. He armed? Yes, Hayes said flatly. Just like you probably are. We all take our security seriously, Mr. Reed. Question is whether we're here to shoot each other or to stop Richards from destroying more lives. Reed studied Hayes for several seconds, then released the security chain and opened the door. Come in. But if I see anyone else approach this house, our conversation ends immediately. They entered. The interior was sparse furniture that came with the rental, no personal items visible, the kind of temporary setup people used when they needed to disappear quickly. Reed closed the door and gestured to a couch. Sit. You look like you're about to collapse, Commander. Elena lowered herself onto the couch, grateful to take weight off her protesting legs. Hayes remained standing, positioning himself where he could watch both Reed and the windows. You said you have evidence, Elena began. Reed moved to a laptop on the coffee table, opened it, and turned it to face her. The screen showed a directory of files, hundreds of them, organized by date and operation name. 3 years of classified reports, financial transactions, and operational summaries. Everything Black Hawk Defense did under Richards's direction. Reed's voice was flat, reciting facts. Illegal weapons testing in Yemen. Unauthorized strikes in Syria. The Istanbul incident where we killed 14 civilians, and Richards ordered the bodies buried and the evidence destroyed. Elena's breath caught. Istanbul. 5 years ago. We were testing an earlier version of Orpheus target identification through thermal imaging and biometric scanning. System identified a wedding party as hostile insurgents because their heat signatures matched algorithmic parameters for group gatherings in conflict zones. Reed's voice cracked slightly. 14 dead, including 6 children. Richards called it acceptable losses in weapons development. Told us to delete all records and move on. Hayes leaned forward. You participated in this operation. I drove the equipment truck. I didn't pull any triggers, but I was there. I helped load the bodies, helped pour concrete over the burial site. Reed met his eyes. I've told myself for 5 years that I was following orders, that I didn't have a choice. But watching Commander Hawthorne nearly die because she tried to expose the truth." He shook his head. "I can't keep being that person." "Why now?" Elena asked. "You've had this evidence for 5 years. Why come forward now?" "Because Richards is about to deploy Orpheus internationally. He's got contracts with 3 foreign governments, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Myanmar. Once those systems are in the field, autonomous weapons become normalized. And when they malfunction, not if, when hundreds or thousands more will die, like those people in Istanbul." Reed's hands trembled slightly. "I can live with my guilt. I can't live with enabling more massacres." Elena studied him, trying to assess truth from performance. Everything he was saying aligned with what they already suspected about Richards. But it was almost too perfect, exactly the evidence they needed offered exactly when they needed it. "How did you get all this data out of Blackhawk's systems?" Hayes asked. "These files would have been on air-gapped networks, multiple layers of security." "I was logistics. Part of my job was maintaining backup systems in case primary networks were compromised during operations. I had legitimate access to everything, and I used that access to copy files to external drives over the course of 2 years." Reed closed the laptop. "Nobody suspected because I was just the equipment guy. Not a shooter, not a decision maker, just the person who made sure the gear worked." "And Frost? Did he know you were copying files?" Reed's jaw tightened. "Jackson Frost is the best operator I've ever worked with. Delta Force legend, 20 years of combat experience, more successful missions than most entire units complete in their existence. But Richards broke him. Broke all of us, really, but especially Frost." "How?" Elena asked. "Istanbul. Frost was team leader. When he realized what Orpheus had done, that we'd killed a wedding party, he wanted to report it. Wanted to stop the whole program. Richards told him that if he did, everyone on the team would face charges for the unauthorized operation. We'd all go to Leavenworth while Richards walked away clean." Reed's voice hardened. So Frost made a choice. He protected his team by becoming Richards's attack dog. Every mission after that, every morally questionable operation, Frost executed perfectly because he believed he was keeping us out of prison. "That doesn't excuse trying to kill me," Elena said. "No, it doesn't. But Frost isn't a monster. He's a good man who got backed into an impossible position and made bad choices trying to protect his people." Reed stood walking to the window, checking the street. "When Richards ordered him to eliminate you," Frost argued. "Said it crossed a line that killing a federal operator would bring hell down on all of us. Richards told him it was either you or the entire team facing treason charges." Hayes moved closer to Reed. "Are you saying Frost pushed Commander Hawthorne off that cliff under duress?" "I'm saying Frost made a choice between letting one person die and watching everyone he'd served with for 15 years get destroyed. He chose wrong. He knows it. But maybe that context matters when this goes to trial." Elena felt something shift in her understanding of Frost. He was still guilty, had still tried to murder her, but the picture was more complex than simple villainy. Richards had created a situation where good people felt they had no choice but to do terrible things. That was how corruption worked. Not through cartoon evil, but through incrementalism and impossible choices. "The evidence on that laptop," Elena said, "is it everything you claimed proof that Richards ordered illegal operations? Everything. Financial transfers showing he took kickbacks from Blackhawk Defense. Operational orders with his signature authorizing strikes in non-combat zones. Communications proving he knew about Istanbul and ordered the cover-up." Reed turned from the window. "It's enough to charge him with war crimes, conspiracy, and treason. But only if we can keep it secure until it reaches people Richards can't threaten or buy off." "We can do that," Hayes said. "I've got contacts in JAG who can—" The window exploded, inward glass fragmenting in a shower of crystalline shards. Reed jerked backward, a red blossom spreading across his chest. Center mass perfect shot. Elena threw herself sideways off the couch, her body screaming protest as broken ribs ground together. Hayes was already moving, weapon drawn, returning fire through the shattered window. Reed collapsed, gasping blood, pumping between his fingers as he clutched his chest. Elena crawled to him, pressed her hand over the wound, arterial bleeding, pulsing, warm and fast. He was dying. "The laptop," Reed choked out. "Password is Istanbul 2019. Tell Frost. Tell him." His eyes went distant, stopped focusing. Elena felt for a pulse. Nothing. "Sniper!" Hayes was shouting into his radio. "Carson, do you have eyes on the shooter?" Carson's voice crackled back. "Negative shot came from southeast, maybe 400 meters. Professional work. Target's already displaced." More gunfire erupted from outside automatic weapons. This time, multiple shooters. Hayes grabbed Elena's arm, hauling her away from Reed's body. "We're leaving now." They ran for the back door, Elena's injured body barely keeping pace. Behind them, the front door splintered under sustained fire. Whoever Richards had sent wasn't subtle. They wanted Reed dead and didn't care about witnesses. Hayes kicked open the back door and they burst into the yard. A fence blocked their escape. Hayes boosted Elena over despite her injuries, then vaulted it himself. They ran through a neighbor's yard, dogs barking, lights coming on in surrounding houses. Carson's SUV screeched around the corner passenger door, already open. They piled in, and he accelerated before the door was even closed, tires smoking. "Reed?" Carson asked. "Dead," Hayes replied shortly. "But we got the laptop." Elena looked down, realizing she'd grabbed the computer during the chaos instinct taking over, securing the objective, even while under fire. Her hands were shaking, Reed's blood still warm on her fingers. "They killed him to keep him quiet," she said, her voice hollow. "Richards knew he was talking and sent a team to clean it up. Which means Richards has sources inside our investigation," Hayes said grimly. "Someone told him Reed made contact." They drove in silence for several miles, taking random turns to ensure they weren't followed. Finally, Carson pulled into a truck stop parking lot, killing the lights. Hayes turned to Elena. "You still have Reed's password, Istanbul 2019. He opened the laptop, typed it in. The computer unlocked, displaying the same directory of files Reed had shown them. Hayes began opening documents at random, scanning contents. "This is real," he said after several minutes. "Financial records, operational orders, everything Reed claimed. With this, we can bury Richards." "If we can get it to people he doesn't control," Elena said. Reed was right. Richards has people everywhere. JAG, Pentagon, oversight, probably even internal affairs. The moment we submit this through official channels, it'll disappear and we'll have accidents. Then we don't go through official channels. Hayes closed the laptop. We go to the press. Simultaneous releases to the Washington Post, the New York Times, and every major investigative outlet. Make the evidence so public that Richards can't suppress it. That's illegal. Releasing classified information. So is murdering federal operators and running unauthorized wars. At this point, Elena, we're choosing between following rules that protect the guilty or breaking rules to expose them. He met her eyes. "I'm willing to accept court-martial if it means stopping Richards. Question is whether you are." Elena thought about Reed dying on that floor because he'd tried to do the right thing. Thought about the 14 people killed in Istanbul because an algorithm couldn't distinguish a wedding from a military gathering. Thought about all the future victims if Orpheus deployed internationally. "Make the calls," she said. "Let's burn it all down." Hayes made the first call from a burner phone at 0200 hours, sitting in the cab of Carson's SUV, while Elena leaned against the passenger door trying to stay conscious. Her body was shutting down again. She could feel it in the way her thoughts kept fragmenting and the cold spreading through her limbs despite the truck's heater running full blast. "Andrea Chen, Washington Post Investigative Unit," Hayes said into the phone. "My name is Colonel William Hayes, retired Navy SEAL. I have evidence of treason, war crimes, and conspiracy reaching into Pentagon leadership. I'm sending encrypted files to your secure drop in the next 60 seconds. You'll want to verify them immediately because people are dying to keep this quiet." He disconnected before the reporter could respond, then repeated the process with the New York Times and ProPublica. 3 simultaneous drops, 3 different journalists, with reputations for breaking stories that powerful people wanted buried. "That's it," he said, closing the laptop. "The evidence is out there. Even if Richards comes after us now, he can't stop publication." "How long before the stories run?" Elena asked, her voice slurring slightly. She was losing the battle with consciousness. 24 to 48 hours if they move fast. Longer if they're cautious. Hayes looked at her, concern deepening the lines around his eyes. You need a hospital, Elena. You're going into shock. Can't. If Richards knows we got Reed's files, he'll have people watching every hospital within 200 miles. She forced herself to sit up straighter. We need somewhere he won't think to look. Carson spoke from the driver's seat. I know a place. Retired Navy doc runs a veterinary clinic outside Carson City. Used to patch up operators who couldn't go through official channels. Discreet, competent, and owes me a favor. A veterinarian, Elena managed a weak laugh. Seems fitting, given how I feel right now. They drove through darkness, Elena drifting in and out of awareness. She surfaced once to find Hayes monitoring her pulse, his expression grim. Surfaced again to realize they'd stopped moving, that hands were lifting her from the vehicle. The clinic smelled of animals and disinfectant. A man in his 60s with steel gray hair and surgeon's hands examined her injuries with practiced efficiency. Separated shoulder, recently reduced but already re-inflamed. Fractured wrist, improperly set. Multiple broken ribs, one possibly puncturing the pleural cavity. Severe contusions, lacerations, and what looks like the early stages of sepsis from infected wounds. The doctor, Dr. Marcus Chen, according to the nameplate on his desk, looked at Hayes. What did she do, fight a bear? Something like that. She needs a hospital bill. I can stabilize her, but if that rib has punctured her lung, do what you can. Hospital isn't an option right now. Chen worked for the next 3 hours. Elena fading in and out as he reset her wrist, properly drained fluid from around her damaged lung, pumped her full of antibiotics and pain medication. When she finally came fully conscious, dawn light was filtering through the clinic windows, and her body felt like it belonged to someone else. Welcome back, Chen said, checking her vitals. You're stabilized, but barely. If you exert yourself in any way over the next week, you'll undo everything I just did and probably die in the process. Noted. I'm serious, Commander. Your body has been through catastrophic trauma. The only reason you're alive is because you're in exceptional physical condition, and apparently too stubborn to die. But even stubbornness has limits. Hayes entered the room carrying coffee and what looked like a tablet computer. The stories are starting to break. Washington Post just published their initial article, Pentagon General linked to illegal weapons program and war crimes. It's already trending on every news platform. How's Richards responding? Total denial. His office released a statement calling it a politically motivated hit piece based on fabricated evidence from disgruntled contractors. Hayes pulled up the article on the tablet, but 3 more media outlets are running their own stories based on Reed's files. The details match across all of them: Istanbul, the Yemen operations, the financial kickbacks. Richards can deny all he wants, but the evidence is overwhelming. Will it be enough to charge him? JAG has already opened an investigation. So has the FBI, and the Senate Armed Services Committee just announced emergency hearings. Hayes set down the tablet. Richards's career is over. Question is whether he goes down fighting or goes quietly. Elena accepted a cup of coffee from Chen, her hands shaking slightly as she raised it to her lips. Men like Richards don't go quietly. If he's going down, he'll try to take everyone with him. As if summoning him with the words, Hayes's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, frowned, and answered. Colonel Hayes. The voice on the other end was faint, but Elena could hear it male-controlled, carrying the authority of rank. Colonel, this is Brigadier General Victor Richards. I believe we should talk. Hayes put the phone on speaker. I don't have anything to say to you, General. Then listen. The evidence your people released to the press, it's incomplete, taken out of context. I can provide documentation that explains every operation, every financial transaction, but I need certain assurances first. You want immunity. I want to avoid unnecessary damage to national security. Some of those operations were authorized at the highest levels. Publishing full details could compromise ongoing missions and endanger American lives. Richards paused. I'm prepared to resign quietly and accept responsibility for operational failures if you agree to stop releasing classified information. Elena grabbed Hayes's arm, shaking her head urgently. Hayes nodded understanding. That's not my decision to make, General. The evidence is with multiple news organizations. They'll publish what serves the public interest. Then perhaps we can reach a different arrangement, one that benefits everyone involved. Richards's tone shifted, became more calculating. Commander Hawthorne survived her fall from that cliff through remarkable resilience. I respect that. I also respect that she's currently wanted for questioning regarding the deaths of 2 Black Hawk defense contractors and millions in property damage at a classified facility. Hayes's hand tightened on the phone. Commander Hawthorne acted in self-defense and in response to an imminent threat. That's one interpretation. Another is that she went rogue, infiltrated a facility without authorization, and activated a weapons system that killed 2 men. Without Thomas Reed's testimony to corroborate her version of events, and tragically Mr. Reed died before providing sworn statements, it becomes her word against multiple witnesses who tell a very different story. You're threatening to prosecute her. I'm offering perspective. Commander Hawthorne is a decorated operator with an exemplary record. It would be tragic if that record were destroyed by charges of manslaughter and destruction of government property. But these things can be avoided if we reach an understanding. Elena took the phone from Hayes. This is Hawthorne. What do you want, Richards? A pause. Then, Commander. Glad you're still with us. I want the complete set of files Thomas Reed compiled. All copies, all backups. In exchange, I'll ensure no charges are filed against you or Colonel Hayes. You walk away clean. And you continue running illegal operations. I continue serving my country in the ways that actually matter, rather than the ways that look good on CNN. Richard's voice hardened. You're a SEAL commander. You understand operational necessity. Sometimes protecting American interests requires actions that can't withstand public scrutiny. The operations you're condemning saved American lives, prevented terrorist attacks, and maintained strategic advantages. But they require secrecy to remain effective. They killed 14 civilians in Istanbul. A tragedy, one that haunts me. But we learned from that mistake, improved the technology, created safeguards. Orpheus, in its current form, has a 97% accuracy rate in target identification. That's better than human operators achieve in similar conditions. 3% error rate still means innocent people die. 3% error rate means 97% of actual threats are eliminated before they kill Americans. You want to talk about moral calculations? I've made them. I've lived with them. And I'll continue making them because that's what leadership requires. Richards let that hang. You have 24 hours to decide. After that, I file charges and you spend the next decade fighting them while I continue my work with or without your approval. The call disconnected. Elena handed the phone back to Hayes, her mind working through options. Richards was offering a devil's bargain, her freedom, in exchange for his continued ability to run covert operations without oversight. We can't accept, she said. I know. He'll come after us, use every resource he has to destroy our credibility and bury us in legal proceedings. I know that too. Hayes sat down heavily. But Reed died to get that evidence public. We don't honor his sacrifice by letting Richards buy our silence. Carson appeared in the doorway. Hate to interrupt, but we've got a problem. 2 SUVs just pulled up outside. 4 men, all armed, all moving like professionals. Hayes was on his feet, instantly weapon drawn. Federal agents or Richards's people. Can't tell. They're not showing badges. Carson moved to the window, peering through the blinds. But they're surrounding the building. We're blocked in. Elena tried to stand her body, protesting immediately. Chen pushed her back down. You move, you die. I'm not being dramatic. Your lung is barely holding pressure. Physical exertion will collapse it completely. Then I guess I'm not moving. Elena looked at Hayes. But you can. Take the laptop and go. There's a back exit through the kennels. I'll buy you time. I'm not leaving you. Sir, with respect, this isn't about loyalty or honor. It's about completing the mission. Reed's evidence has to stay public, has to make it to the hearings. That only happens if someone survives to testify. She met his eyes. You know I'm right. Hayes looked torn, years of training and experience warring with personal loyalty. Finally, he nodded. Carson, you're with me. We go out the back, get to a secure location, and make sure every piece of evidence gets to the Senate hearing. What about the commander? The commander is staying exactly where she is, Chen said firmly. And I'm calling the local police. Whatever jurisdictional authority those men outside think they don't have the right to storm a private medical facility. They won't care about legal niceties, Elena said. If they're Richards's people, they'll come in shooting. A voice outside amplified through a bullhorn. This is Federal Agent James Morrison, FBI. We have a warrant for the arrest of Lieutenant Commander Elena Hawthorne. Send her out and nobody gets hurt. Hayes moved to the window, studied the men outside. They're carrying federal identification, but something's off. Their positioning is too aggressive for a standard arrest warrant. Because they're not here to arrest me, Elena said quietly. They're here to make sure I don't testify. The bullhorn, again. You have 3 minutes to comply. After that, we're coming in. Chen grabbed his phone, dialing 911. Yes, I need police at the Carson City Veterinary Clinic. Armed men claiming to be federal agents are threatening to breach the building. The front window exploded. Gas canisters tumbled through, immediately spewing thick white smoke. Hayes grabbed Carson's arm. Move now. They disappeared toward the back of the clinic. Elena heard the rear door crash open, shouts, then gunfire, sharp cracks that meant Hayes and Carson were fighting their way out. Chen was coughing, eyes streaming from the gas. Commander, we need to evacuate. I can't move, Doc. You go. Get out while you can. I'm not leaving a patient. The front door exploded inward. Men in tactical gear poured through weapons, raised, moving with practiced efficiency. They spread out, clearing rooms, converging on Elena's position. The lead man approached, gas mask obscuring his features. Commander Hawthorne, you're coming with us. Show me the warrant. He produced a folded document. Elena scanned it quickly, official FBI letterhead signed by a federal judge. Legal in every visible way, but the timing was impossible. Richards couldn't have gotten a legitimate warrant issued this fast, which meant it was forgery, which meant these men weren't federal agents. This warrant is fake, she said. That's for a judge to decide. Right now, you're under arrest for manslaughter and destruction of federal property. You can come peacefully or we can drag you. Choice is yours. Elena's hand moved to her sidearm, still holstered at her side, somehow overlooked in the chaos of the past few days. Her fingers closed around the grip. The lead man's weapon snapped up, aimed at her chest. Don't. You're not FBI. Federal agents don't breach medical facilities with gas grenades and fake warrants. Elena's hand stayed on her weapon. You're private contractors. Black Hawk Defense or one of Richards' shell companies. Last warning, Commander. Here's mine. Colonel Hayes has all the evidence. By now, he's halfway to D.C. with files that prove Richards ordered war crimes and illegal operations. Killing me doesn't change that. All it does is add another murder to the charges. The man hesitated, uncertainty flickering across what Elena could see of his face. Behind him, his team members exchanged glances. Then a new voice cut through the tension. Stand down! All of you weapons on the ground now! Elena turned her head painfully, every movement grinding broken bones to see sheriff's deputies pouring through both entrances, weapons drawn, surrounding Richards's team. The lead deputy, a woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and a voice like gravel, stepped forward. I don't know what kind of jurisdiction you boys think you have, but in Carson City you don't breach medical facilities without going through me first. So either show me legitimate federal credentials and a warrant that isn't obviously forged, or start explaining why I shouldn't arrest you for assault and impersonating federal officers. The tactical team leader looked at his men, calculating odds. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and rapidly losing the initiative. He lowered his weapon. There's been a misunderstanding. I'm sure there has, and we'll sort it out at my station. Put your weapons on the ground, hands on your heads. You're all being detained pending verification of credentials. 20 minutes later, Elena was being loaded into an ambulance, a real one this time, with actual paramedics and a police escort. Through the open doors, she saw Hayes and Carson returning from the forest, the laptop secure in a weatherproof case. Hayes climbed into the ambulance beside her. The cavalry arrived just in time. How'd they know to come? Dr. Chen's 911 call. Plus I made a few calls of my own while we were escaping. Contacted the local sheriff's office, directly explained the situation. Convinced them that federal credentials didn't necessarily mean federal authority. He smiled slightly. Small-town law enforcement doesn't take kindly to armed teams raiding their jurisdictions without proper notification. What about those men, Richards' team? Being held for questioning. Their credentials aren't holding up to scrutiny, and the warrant is definitely forged. By the time they make bail, the Senate hearings will be underway and their testimony won't matter. The ambulance began moving, siren wailing. Elena felt herself fading again, the adrenaline that had kept her conscious finally depleting. The evidence, she managed. Secure. I've got multiple copies in multiple locations and 3 different senators already demanding to see the full files. Richards can't suppress this. Hayes squeezed her uninjured hand gently. You did it, Elena. You survived the fall, exposed the conspiracy, and lived to see justice done. Reed did it. He's the one who kept evidence for 5 years. He's the one who called me. And he died because of it. But his death won't be meaningless if we make sure Richards and everyone involved face consequences. Elena's eyes closed. Promise me something, sir. What? When this is over, when the trials are done, and Richards is in prison, make sure someone tells Frost's family. Make sure they know he wasn't just a criminal, that he was a good soldier put in an impossible position. I will. And Hayes. Yes. Next time you offer me a tracking device, I'm asking for the whole extraction team up front. She heard him laugh as unconsciousness claimed her. When Elena woke again, she was in a proper hospital, the kind with federal security outside the door and military lawyers waiting to take her statement. Hayes was there along with 2 senators from the Armed Services Committee and a JAG officer who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Commander Hawthorne, the JAG officer began. I'm Colonel David Park. I need to take your statement regarding the events at the classified facility in the Sierra Nevada mountains, the subsequent death of Thomas Reed, and your knowledge of Brigadier General Victor Richards' activities. Over the next 3 hours, Elena recounted everything. The suspicious behavior of Frost's team, the attempt on her life, the climb, the infiltration of the facility, the activation of Orpheus. She corroborated Reed's files with her first-hand observations, provided the photos she'd taken, explained the timeline of events. The senators listened with expressions that grew increasingly grim. When she finished, the older of the 2, Senator Patricia Aldridge from Virginia, leaned forward. Commander, do you believe General Richards poses an ongoing threat to national security? Yes, ma'am, unequivocally. And the autonomous weapon system, Orpheus. In your professional opinion, should such technology be deployed? Elena chose her words carefully. Senator, technology itself isn't good or evil. A hammer can build homes or crack skulls depending on who's swinging it. But autonomous weapons that select and kill targets without human oversight, she shook her head. That crosses a line, takes the humanity out of decisions that should always require human judgment and accountability. We've spent centuries developing rules of war, Geneva Convention's laws designed to limit the horror of combat. Algorithms don't understand those rules. They can't weigh context, can't exercise mercy, can't recognize when following programming leads to atrocity. Yet proponents argue autonomous systems save American lives by removing soldiers from harm's way. They do. And if we're only talking about autonomous defense systems technology that protects bases or shoots down incoming missiles, I support that. But Orpheus wasn't defensive. It was designed to select human targets and kill them. And the moment we normalize that technology, we guarantee it spreads to every military and insurgent group on Earth. Then we're living in a world where machines decide who dies, and we've lost something fundamental about what it means to be human. Senator Aldridge exchanged glances with her colleague. Thank you, Commander. That perspective will be valuable in our hearings. Over the next 72 hours, Elena's world contracted to hospital rooms and legal briefings. The media frenzy outside was constant reporters camping at the hospital entrance, demanding statements, running stories with headlines like, SEAL Commander exposes Pentagon conspiracy, and The Woman Who Climbed Back from Death. Hayes managed the media circus with military efficiency, issuing carefully worded statements that satisfied public curiosity without compromising the investigation. Meanwhile, the Senate hearings began. Reed's evidence presented to the Armed Services Committee in closed session. On the fourth day, Hayes entered Elena's room with news. Richards has been arrested. They picked him up at his Pentagon office 3 hours ago. Charges include conspiracy to commit murder, war crimes, misappropriation of military resources, and about 15 other violations. Will they stick? Reed's files are ironclad. Financial records, operational orders with Richards's signature communications proving he knew about Istanbul and ordered the cover-up. Even with expensive lawyers, he's looking at life in military prison. Elena felt something release in her chest, tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. And Frost, still in custody. His lawyers are negotiating a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Richards. If he cooperates fully, he might avoid the death penalty. That's more than he deserves. Maybe. But Reed's last words were about Frost, about how he wanted you to tell him something. Any idea what that was? Elena thought back to those final moments in the Reno safe house. Reed's voice growing weak as blood pumped between his fingers. He said to tell Frost, but he died before finishing. Maybe he wanted you to tell Frost it was okay, that someone understood the impossible position he'd been in. Hayes sat down beside the bed. Reed spent 5 years carrying evidence, knowing he could stop Richards, but afraid to act. Fear makes us complicit in things we'd never actively choose. Maybe he wanted Frost to know that redemption is still possible, even for people who've done terrible things. You're more forgiving than I am. I'm older, seen more good people do bad things, and bad people do good things. The lines aren't as clear as we'd like them to be. Hayes pulled out his phone, showing her a news article. Speaking of redemption, look at this. The headline read, "Military contractors speak out against autonomous weapons." The article featured interviews with former Black Hawk defense personnel discussing their experiences with Orpheus and calling for stricter regulations on AI warfare. Public opinion is shifting, Hayes continued. Your story surviving the fall, exposing the conspiracy, it's changed the conversation. People are asking hard questions about how much authority we should give to machines, how much oversight military contractors need, how we prevent future Richards from abusing their power. Good. Reed died for that conversation. Worth something that it's happening. A knock at the door interrupted them. Colonel Park entered carrying a folder. Commander Hawthorne, I have updates on your legal status. Elena tensed. Am I being charged? No. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, JAG has determined your actions at the classified facility were justified under self-defense and imminent threat protocols. You're cleared of any wrongdoing. Park set the folder on her bed. However, there will be a formal inquiry into the events leading to the deaths of Elliot Cooper and Thomas Reed. You'll need to provide sworn testimony, but it's procedural. No charges anticipated. What about the unauthorized use of classified weapon systems? Mitigating circumstances. You activated Orpheus to demonstrate its flaws and to defend yourself against armed hostiles. Context matters. Park's expression softened slightly. Commander, you exposed a conspiracy that reached into Pentagon leadership. You survived attempts on your life and brought evidence to light that's changing military policy. The Navy isn't going to prosecute you for that. After Park left, Elena lay back against her pillows, feeling exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical injuries. She'd done it. Survived exposed. Richards protected the evidence, lived to tell the story. But the cost. Reed dead in Reno. Cooper and Reed's team member dead at the facility. Frost facing life in prison. 14 civilians dead in Istanbul years ago, their deaths now public knowledge, but justice delayed too long to matter to their families. You're thinking about the people we couldn't save, Hayes said quietly. Always am. That's what makes you a good operator. The day we stop caring about those we couldn't help is the day we become like Richards, seeing people as acceptable losses instead of human beings whose lives matter. Does it get easier? The weight of it. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. No, but you learn to carry it better. And you find meaning in making sure their deaths weren't for nothing. Reed's evidence will change policy, will prevent future Orpheus systems from being deployed without oversight. Those 14 people in Istanbul, their story is public now, their deaths acknowledged. It's not enough, but it's something. Something, Elena echoed. Has to be enough, doesn't it? It's all we've got. 2 weeks later, Elena was discharged from the hospital with a medical profile that limited her to light duty for 6 months. Her shoulder would require months of physical therapy to regain full function. Her ribs had healed enough to allow basic movement but would ache for years whenever weather changed. The limp from her damaged leg had become permanent, nothing debilitating but enough that she'd never pass another SEAL physical fitness test. Her combat career was over. She was sitting on a bench outside the hospital waiting for Hayes to bring the car around when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Hawthorne. Commander, this is Jackson Frost. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. How'd you get this number? I still have some resources. Won't for much longer. My plea deal requires surrendering everything. But I needed to call before that happened. He paused. Reed left you a message. I heard about what he said before he died. He didn't finish it. He didn't need to. I know what he was going to say. Frost's voice was rough. Thomas Reed was the best man on my team. Most ethical, most conscientious, most troubled by what we'd become. He kept that evidence because he still believed in justice, even when the rest of us had stopped. And when he finally found the courage to use it, Richards had him killed. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked Reed to tell me something and now I'm telling you. Reed would have said this, that we all made choices, that some of us chose wrong, but that choosing right, even late, even at cost, still matters. Frost's voice cracked slightly. I pushed you off that cliff, Commander. I tried to kill you because I was afraid, and Richards convinced me I had no choice. But Reed proved there's always a choice. He chose truth over survival. And it cost him everything. What do you want from me? Frost absolution. No. I want you to know that when I testify against Richards, when I spend the rest of my life in prison, it's not because my lawyers made a deal, it's because Reed showed me what real courage looks like. And if one good thing comes from this nightmare, it should be that his courage meant something. The line went dead. Elena sat there holding the silent phone, watching traffic pass. Hayes pulled up in his truck, got out to help her stand. She waved him off. She could manage on her own now, slowly, painfully, but on her own. You okay? He asked. Frost called. He's taking the plea deal. Full cooperation against Richards. That's good news. Is it? He's still a murderer, still pushed me off a cliff, still participated in war crimes. And now he's making the only amends possible. Testimony that ensures Richards can't hurt anyone else. Hayes opened the passenger door for her. Maybe that doesn't erase his guilt, but maybe it means something anyway. Elena climbed into the truck, her body protesting every movement. I climbed 300 feet with broken bones, infiltrated an armed facility, turned their weapon against them. And somehow the hardest part is this: deciding what justice looks like when everyone involved has blood on their hands. Welcome to the complicated part of heroism, Hayes said, pulling into traffic. The shooting and the climbing and the impossible odds, that's the easy stuff. It's the aftermath, the moral accounting, the living with consequences. That's where real courage gets tested. I preferred the climbing. Most people do. They drove in silence for several minutes. Finally, Elena asked, "What happens now? After the hearings, after the trials?" You recover, you figure out what comes next. Maybe training, maybe teaching, maybe something completely different. But knowing you. Hayes smiled. You'll find a way to keep fighting the good fight, just maybe with less cliff climbing involved. Can't make promises. Wouldn't believe them if you did. The Senate hearing room was packed when Elena entered. 6 weeks later, her dress uniform pressed sharp, despite the medical brace still supporting her shoulder. She walked with the slight hitch that had become permanent, each step a reminder of the cliff that had tried to claim her. Cameras tracked her progress down the aisle, every major network covering what the media had dubbed the Orpheus hearings. Hayes walked beside her, steady as always. Remember, they're going to try to discredit you. make you seem emotional, unstable, anything to undermine your testimony. I climbed a cliff with broken ribs. I think I can handle some senators. These senators have ended careers, Elena. Don't underestimate them. She took her seat at the witness table, the microphone in front of her amplifying every sound. The gallery behind her buzzed with whispered conversations. She recognized reporters, military officials, and in the back row, a woman she hadn't expected to see, Sarah Frost Jackson's wife, her face drawn with exhaustion and grief. Senator Aldridge gavelled the hearing to order. Lieutenant Commander Elena Hawthorne, you've been sworn in previously. Your testimony today will address the events surrounding Project Orpheus, the classified autonomous weapons system developed by Black Hawk Defense under contract with the Department of Defense. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. Let's begin with the night of May 15th when you were allegedly pushed from a cliff during a training exercise. Aldridge leaned forward. Commander, several witnesses from Black Hawk Defense have stated under oath that you fell accidentally, that they attempted rescue operations, and that you disappeared into the forest before they could reach you. Why should this committee believe your version of events differs from theirs? Elena met her gaze steadily. Because their version doesn't explain why I overheard them discussing clean extraction and no witnesses the night before. Doesn't explain why they walked away from the cliff edge without attempting rescue. Doesn't explain the classified equipment and operations they were hiding. Senator Marcus Webb, representing Montana, cut in sharply. But you have no physical evidence of being pushed. No witnesses who support your claim. Just your word against 4 decorated contractors. I have my injuries, Senator. Medical records documenting the precise nature of trauma consistent with being forcibly thrown rather than accidentally falling. I have the tracking device Colonel Hayes provided, which recorded my exact position, and the fact that I survived a fall that should have been fatal. And I have Thomas Reed's sworn statement given before his murder corroborating my account. Mr. Reed's death is unfortunate, but it doesn't constitute proof of your allegations. It constitutes proof that someone wanted him silenced before he could testify. Elena kept her voice level. Senator, I'm a Navy SEAL with 15 years of service. I've operated in some of the most dangerous environments on Earth. I know the difference between an accident and an assassination attempt. What happened on that cliff was calculated murder, and the only reason I'm sitting here is because they underestimated what a SEAL can survive. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Aldridge gavelled for order. Commander, let's move to the facility breach. You infiltrated a classified installation without authorization, activated a weapons system that resulted in 2 deaths and caused extensive property damage. How do you justify these actions? I justify them by the fact that Black Hawk Defense had just tried to kill me, that I had evidence of illegal operations, and that I needed proof of what they were developing. Elena pulled documents from her folder. These are the photographs I took inside the facility. Project Orpheus, a fully autonomous weapons system capable of selecting and eliminating human targets without operator oversight. This technology violates multiple international treaties and represents an existential threat to the laws of war. Senator Webb took the photographs, studied them. These images show a weapons platform. They don't prove illegality. Advanced military technology often appears threatening to those unfamiliar with strategic defense requirements. Senator, I'm a SEAL sniper. I'm intimately familiar with weapons technology. What I saw wasn't defensive. It was an algorithm designed to kill people based on programmed parameters without human judgment. Elena's voice hardened. That system killed 14 civilians in Istanbul 5 years ago during testing. Killed them because it couldn't distinguish a wedding celebration from a military gathering. And General Richards ordered those deaths covered up so he could continue development. Those are serious allegations without proof. Thomas Reed provided proof. Financial records showing Richards received payments from Black Hawk Defense totaling over $2 million. Operational orders with his signature authorizing weapons testing in civilian areas. Communications proving he knew about Istanbul casualties and ordered evidence destroyed. Elena leaned forward. Senator, I understand you may have worked with General Richards. Many respected officers did. But that doesn't change the fact that he betrayed his oath and ordered American operators to commit war crimes. Webb's face flushed. I'll remind you, Commander, that you're here to answer questions, not make accusations. I'm here to tell the truth, Senator. If that truth is uncomfortable, that's not my problem. Aldridge intervened. Let's take a 15-minute recess. Commander Hawthorne, you'll remain available for additional questioning. Elena stood her leg protesting and followed Hayes out of the hearing room. In the corridor, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. Security pushed them back as Hayes guided her to a private conference room. You pissed off Webb, Hayes said once the door closed. Webb is on Richards's payroll. Reed's files showed it campaign contributions from defense contractors, including Blackhawk. He's going to defend Richards no matter what I say. Then we need to give the committee something they can't ignore. Hayes pulled out his phone. I've been working another angle. Frost agreed to testify today. He's being transported from detention now. He's cooperating. Fully. Told his lawyers he wants to make a statement regardless of how it affects his plea deal. Sarah convinced him, said Reed's death meant something had to change even if it cost Jackson everything. Hayes checked his watch. He'll be here in 30 minutes. When he takes the stand, everything changes. They returned to the hearing room as it reconvened. Elena retook her seat, watching as senators filtered back in. The gallery had grown even more packed, people standing along the walls, sensing something significant was about to happen. Aldridge gavelled the session to order. The committee calls Jackson Frost. The doors opened. Frost entered, flanked by federal marshals, his hands cuffed in front of him. He'd lost weight since Elena had seen him at the facility, his face gaunt, haunted. But he walked with the bearing of a soldier, head up, shoulders back. His eyes found Elena's, held for a moment, then moved on. He was sworn in and took the witness seat. Aldridge began the questioning. Mr. Frost, you were the operational commander of Black Hawk Defense's training unit. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. And you were present on May 15th when Commander Hawthorne allegedly fell from a cliff. Frost's jaw tightened. I wasn't present when she fell, Senator. I was present when I pushed her. The hearing room erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. Aldridge's gavel hammered repeatedly. Elena sat frozen, not expecting Frost to admit it so directly, so completely. Order! Aldridge's voice cut through the chaos. Mr. Frost, you understand you're under oath that this testimony can be used in your criminal proceedings. I understand, ma'am. I pushed Commander Hawthorne off that cliff because General Richards ordered me to eliminate her. She'd discovered our illegal operations, and Richards said she was a threat to national security. I believed him. I followed orders. And I tried to murder a decorated Navy SEAL because I was too afraid to stand up to a corrupt officer. Webb leaned into his microphone. Mr. Frost, you're currently facing criminal charges. This confession could result in additional penalties. I know. I don't care. Frost's voice was steady. Thomas Reed died trying to expose the truth. Cooper died because I activated a weapons system without proper safeguards. 14 people died in Istanbul because I led the operation that tested Orpheus on civilians. I can't undo any of that, but I can make sure everyone knows what really happened, who gave the orders, and why it can never happen again. Elena felt something shift in her chest, not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Frost wasn't trying to save himself. He was trying to honor Reed's sacrifice the only way he could. Aldridge's expression had softened slightly. Mr. Frost, tell this committee about General Richards's involvement in Project Orpheus. Everything you know. For the next 90 minutes, Frost laid it out. Every operation Richards had authorized, every cover-up he'd ordered, every payment he'd received. He corroborated Reed's files with first-hand testimony, providing details that only someone inside the conspiracy could know. He described Istanbul, the wedding party, the algorithm's failure, Richards's cold calculation that 14 civilian deaths were acceptable losses in weapons development. General Richards told us we were protecting America, Frost said, his voice raw, that sometimes defending the nation requires actions that can't withstand public scrutiny. And I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because the alternative was admitting I'd become the kind of operator who murders innocent people and follows illegal orders. He looked directly at the senators. I'm guilty. I own that. But I'm not the architect of this conspiracy. Richards built it, funded it, and protected it. He turned good soldiers into war criminals, and he did it while wearing a flag on his uniform and claiming to serve American values. Webb was silent now, his earlier defensiveness abandoned. Even he couldn't dismiss testimony this damning, this detailed. Aldridge thanked Frost and dismissed him. As marshals led him away, Elena caught his eye one final time. He nodded slightly, acknowledgement perhaps, or apology. She didn't return it. What he'd done couldn't be fixed with nods or words, but his testimony might prevent future atrocities, and that counted for something. The hearing continued for another hour. Expert witnesses testifying about autonomous weapons technology, military lawyers discussing international treaty obligations, Pentagon officials squirming as they tried to explain how Richards had operated without oversight for years. Finally, Aldridge called Elena back to the witness stand. "Commander Hawthorne, you've heard Mr. Frost's testimony. Does it change your assessment of events?" "It confirms what I already knew, Senator, that General Richards ran a criminal conspiracy, that he used private contractors to conduct illegal operations, and that he murdered or ordered the murder of anyone who threatened to expose him." Elena paused. But it also highlights something important about military culture. Good soldiers followed illegal orders because they trusted their chain of command. They believed their general when he said these operations were necessary, authorized, patriotic. That trust is sacred in military service. Richards violated it. He turned loyalty into a weapon and used it to commit atrocities. What recommendations would you make to prevent similar situations? Elena had thought about this question for weeks. First, strengthen oversight of private military contractors. Black Hawk Defense operated for years with minimal accountability because oversight boards were staffed by people with financial stakes in their success. Second, create protected channels for whistleblowers. Reed kept evidence for 5 years because he feared retaliation, and he was right to fear it. Operators need to know they can report illegal activity without destroying their careers or endangering their families. Third, ban autonomous lethal weapon systems entirely. The technology isn't ready, may never be ready, and the consequences of failure are too catastrophic. Senator Webb spoke up, his tone less hostile now. "Commander, you survived extraordinary injuries to bring this evidence forward. You risked your career, your freedom, potentially your life. Why? What drove you to keep fighting when you could have walked away?" Elena thought about the cliff, about hanging by broken fingers over a void that wanted to claim her, about Reed dying on a safe house floor, about 14 people in Istanbul who'd never gotten justice until now, because that's the oath, Senator, to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. When an officer uses his authority to commit war crimes, he becomes a domestic enemy. Stopping him wasn't heroic, it was just doing the job I swore to do. She leaned forward. Every SEAL learns that the easy path and the right path are rarely the same. The easy path would have been dying on that cliff or staying quiet after I survived. The right path was climbing back up and making sure Richards faced justice. I chose the right path because that's what SEALs do. We don't quit. We don't compromise our values. And we sure as hell don't let corrupt officers murder innocent people in America's name. The gallery erupted in applause. Aldridge gavelled for order but didn't silence it immediately. When quiet finally returned, she said, "Thank you, Commander Hawthorne. This committee will recess while we review all testimony and evidence. We expect to issue recommendations within 30 days. Elena stood saluted and walked out of the hearing room with as much dignity as her damaged body allowed. Hayes was waiting in the corridor along with Carson Dr. Chen and Lieutenant Sarah Chen from Naval Intelligence. They formed a protective circle around her as reporters surged forward. One question rose above the others. "Commander, do you think your testimony will be enough to convict Richards?" Elena stopped, turned to face the cameras. "I think the truth is enough. What people do with that truth is up to them. But I've done my part. I've told what happened. The rest is for courts and juries and people with more legal authority than I have. I'm just a SEAL who refused to die when someone tried to kill her." Hayes guided her toward the exit. Outside, the late afternoon sun was warm on her face. She stood for a moment, breathing free air, feeling alive in a way she hadn't since before the cliff. "What now?" Hayes asked. "Now I go back to work. Medical Review Board says I'm unfit for combat operations, but I can teach, train the next generation." Elena smiled slightly. "Turns out nearly dying makes you pretty qualified to teach survival skills." You're really going back to Buds. Not Buds. Something else. There's a program being developed, Advanced Mountain Warfare Training. They want someone who understands what happens when everything goes wrong, when equipment fails, when you're injured and alone, and the mission still needs completing. She looked at Hayes. Someone who can teach operators to keep climbing when every rational thought says to fall. Hayes smiled. Perfect assignment for you. 3 months later, Elena stood at the edge of the same cliff where Frost had pushed her. Below 20 SEAL candidates watched their faces, a mix of determination and skepticism. 2 of them were women, still too few, but more than there had been when Elena went through training. "This cliff tried to kill me," she told them, her voice carrying in the mountain air. "I was pushed from this exact spot with a separated shoulder, broken ribs, fractured wrist, and a head injury. I hung by one hand 300 feet above rocks that should have ended my life. And I want you to understand something. I'm not special. I'm not superhuman. I was just a SEAL who refused to quit." She gestured at the cliff face. "Today, you're going to climb this. You'll have ropes, harnesses, all the safety equipment. But I want you to climb it, understanding what it means to have nothing but yourself. Because that's what combat is sometimes. It's equipment failure and injuries and being alone with impossible odds. It's choosing between falling and climbing when climbing seems impossible." One of the male candidates raised his hand. "Ma'am, what kept you climbing when you were injured and alone?" Anger initially. Sheer stubbornness. Then it became about proving something, that SEALs don't need ropes to climb. Don't need perfect conditions to complete missions. Don't give up just because the situation is impossible. She paused. "But honestly, what really kept me going was thinking about all the people who'd told me I didn't belong in the SEAL teams. Everyone who said women weren't strong enough, weren't tough enough, weren't capable of handling what combat demands. I climbed that cliff to prove them wrong, and to prove to myself that I belonged exactly where I was." One of the female candidates spoke up, a young woman named Torres, with the hungry, determined look Elena recognized from her own reflection years ago. "Ma'am, did you ever doubt yourself? Wonder if they were right?" Elena considered the question. "Every day. Still do sometimes. Doubt is human. It's what you do with doubt that matters. You can let it stop you, or you can use it as fuel to push harder. I used mine as fuel." She moved to the cliff edge, looking down at the place where she'd nearly died. General Richards was convicted 2 weeks ago. Life in military prison without possibility of parole. Jackson Frost is serving 20 years with eligibility for parole after 12. The contractors who participated in illegal operations are facing various sentences. Project Orpheus has been shut down, and Congress passed legislation banning autonomous lethal weapon systems pending international treaty development. Elena turned back to her students. "I tell you this because you need to understand that military service isn't just about following orders. It's about knowing when orders are illegal, when authority is being abused, when you have to stand up and say, 'No, not in my name.'" Richards violated everything the uniform stands for. He got away with it for years because good soldiers followed bad orders. Don't be those soldiers. Torres raised her hand again. "But ma'am, how do we know when orders are legitimate versus when they're illegal? The line isn't always clear." "You're right, it's not. But you have a compass your oath. You swore to support and defend the Constitution, not to blindly follow any officer's commands. When orders violate that Constitution, violate international law, violate basic human decency, that's when you have to stand up. It won't be easy. It might cost you your career, but that's what integrity requires." She gestured toward the cliff. "Enough philosophy. Time to climb. Remember, this isn't about speed. It's about refusing to quit. About finding the next handhold when you think you've reached your limit. About understanding that your body can do more than your mind believes possible." The candidates began their ascent, roped and belayed, but still facing the challenge of vertical stone. Elena watched, offering guidance, correcting technique, pushing them past their perceived limitations. When Torres faltered halfway up, freezing in panic, Elena called up to her. "Lieutenant Torres, you know what I was thinking when I hung from this cliff with broken ribs and a useless arm?" "No, ma'am." "I was thinking about my father. He died when I was 16, but he taught me that mountains don't care who you are. They don't care about your gender, your background, your fears. They only care if you're strong enough to keep climbing. Are you strong enough?" Torres. Yes, ma'am. Then prove it. One hand at a time. One move at a time. Torres started climbing again. Her movements tentative at first, then stronger. When she reached the top, tears streaming down her face, Elena met her there. How does it feel? Like I just conquered the world, ma'am. Good. Remember that feeling. You'll need it when combat gets hard, when missions go wrong, when you're injured and exhausted, and every instinct says to quit. Remember that you climbed this cliff. Remember that you're stronger than your doubts. The sun was setting by the time all candidates completed their climbs. They gathered at the cliff's edge, exhausted but triumphant looking, out over the Sierra Nevada peaks, painted gold and crimson by the dying light. Elena stood before them one last time. You've all heard stories about my climb, about surviving the fall, infiltrating the facility, exposing the conspiracy. People call it heroic. They're wrong. Heroism isn't about doing impossible things. It's about doing necessary things when they're difficult. It's about choosing right over easy truth, over comfort, justice, over personal safety. She touched the scar on her temple, faded now, but still visible, a permanent reminder. I climbed this cliff because dying wasn't acceptable. I exposed Richards because letting him continue was unconscionable. I testified despite threats because silence would have dishonored everyone who died trying to do the right thing. Those weren't heroic choices. They were just the only choices I could live with. Torres spoke up. Ma'am, what do you want us to learn from your story? Elena smiled. That the mountain doesn't care who you are. It only cares if you're strong enough to climb. And you are. All of you. Not because you're special or superhuman, but because you're SEALs. We don't need ropes to climb. We don't need perfect conditions to succeed. We just need the refusal to quit the commitment to our oath and the understanding that sometimes the hardest battles aren't against enemies. They're against our own limitations, our own doubts, our own fear of what failure means. She looked at each of them in turn. You'll face cliffs in your careers. Maybe not literal ones, but challenges that seem impossible. Equipment will fail. Bodies will break. Orders will conflict with conscience. In those moments, remember this day. Remember that you climbed when you thought you couldn't. Remember that limits are negotiable. And remember that being a SEAL means never accepting impossible as an answer. The candidates stood at attention as Elena dismissed them. As they filed away toward base camp, Hayes approached from where he'd been observing. Hell of a speech. Felt right. Elena watched the last of the sunset fade, darkness claiming the mountains. I spent so many years trying to prove I belonged, trying to be tough enough, strong enough, good enough. Took nearly dying to realize I was always good enough. The people who doubted me were wrong, and their doubts said more about them than about me. You've changed the conversation, Elena. Every female operator in the pipeline knows your story, knows that a woman climbed 300 feet with catastrophic injuries, exposed a Pentagon conspiracy, and survived to tell about it. That matters. Reed matters. The 14 people in Istanbul matter. All the operators who followed illegal orders because they trusted their chain of command, they matter. Elena turned to face Hayes. I'm just the one who lived to make sure their stories got told. And that's enough. More than enough. They walked back toward base camp together, Elena's permanent limp marking their pace. Above them, stars emerged in the darkening sky, the same stars that had watched her climb, that had witnessed her survival, that would shine long after her story faded from memory. But for now, in this moment, Elena Hawthorne was exactly where she belonged. Not on battlefields or in Pentagon hearings, but here in the mountains, teaching the next generation what it meant to be a SEAL. Teaching them that strength wasn't about never falling, it was about climbing back up when you did. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was action despite it. That honor wasn't blind obedience, it was knowing when to stand up and say no. She'd fallen from this cliff and refused to die. She'd climbed back up and torn down a conspiracy. She'd survived assassination attempts and legal threats and her own body's collapse. And through it all, She'd proven the simple truth her father had taught her 30 years ago. The mountain doesn't care who you are. It only cares if you have the will to keep climbing when every instinct tells you to fall. Elena had that will. She'd proven it on stone and blood and sheer stubborn refusal to quit. And now she'd spend the rest of her career making sure every SEAL who followed understood that they had it too, that limits were negotiable, that impossible was a challenge rather than a verdict, and that sometimes the greatest victory wasn't winning the fight, but refusing to stop fighting. She'd climbed her cliff. She'd told her truth. She'd honored her oath. The rest was just living with the consequences and teaching others to climb their own impossible heights when their time came. Retry.